closer look at it.
Good morning. I would call this session of Boardroom revision to order. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. With me, farthest to my left, is Richard Whitbread. Next to the city of Stevenson, my name is Harvey Diamond. The city is represented by Mirek Frolek, and our secretary is Suda Aziz. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment rules in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision have been requested are described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statement the applicants or the assessor may make at this hearing must be sworn testimony, and all parties speaking must be sworn in first. Be advised, comparative assessments of properties are not considered as evidence by our board. Our board is appointed annually by council as independent of it and the city administration. We make our decisions on the basis of the evidence that we hear, and we provide written orders that we mail to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to an application for exemption from taxation, and should a party wish to appeal, the matter in which to do so will be included with our order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed to each applicant following their swearing in. We'll then have the assessor's testimony followed by any questions the applicant may have. Then the applicant may provide their testimony followed by any questions, and each party will be given an opportunity to summarize if they wish to do so. Once all the evidence on an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The person will repeat for each item on the docket today, and after all the cases have been heard, we will be closing our hearing. We'll deliberate in private, and we'll make our decisions, which will be forwarded by Richard Mail as soon as possible. The information today will be recorded, live streamed, and form part of a public record. Mr. Gonzalez, thank you.
Hi. Thank you.
Would you like to swear in? Please state your full name.
Mayor Frolic.
And do you swear the evidence you represent is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Would you like to swear in?
Swear.
Please state your full name.
Rod Smart.
And do you swear the evidence you represent is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's the parties. The first matter on the agenda is going to be put down, and so we'll first deal with item 3 on our agenda, which is 1099 Wilkes Avenue.
Yeah, that is correct. And just as an aside, we may have to take a little recess. I think I left my 72 Skirfield at the office by accident, or the applicant's brief, so I think I may have to ask for a copy of it because I've made notes of it, but I think I just left it there in preparation for today's docket.
Okay, well hopefully it'll be at a time when we're going to take a break anyway.
Yeah,
if not,
for sure.
we'll take an extra break if necessary.
Yep. Property we have is file number 193236.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I just
No problem. It
wasn't marked off on my...
Mr. Slaughter and I had discussions with regards to Buffalo Place. He's waiting for a phone call, so that's why we're asking for.
Yeah.
For.
So it might be settled then.
Potentially for.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
File number is 193236. Roll number is fall 061020000. For April 1st, 2020, for using a reference date of April 1st, 2018, we have assessed value of $13,452,000. This is a warehouse in the southwest quadrant of the city of Winnipeg. It was built in 2005, and the wall height that we have in this building is 27 feet. Land area is 343,562, and the leasable area that we have for this property is 96,948. We're asking that the value be confirmed. So a lot of these are individual units. I have pictures on page 2 and page 3, just showing where the location is. So it's on Wilkes, on the bottom of page 3. And just an overview of some of the pictures on page 4. Property owner has been compliant with regards to filling out the income and expense mailers. And on page 5, we have an overview of what those mailers are. So the first leases that we have here for 3,840 square feet. What we do have is, to me, the rent for that property is a bit low at $795. That original lease was in 2007. I'm not sure what the original lease was beforehand, so I'm not too sure if it was a step up. But on the surface of it, it seems a bit low. And we have another lease at $9.95, another one at $7.95, $9.50, and $7.95. So just overall, the rents achieved here are a bit lower than that are reflective of the entire area. On the next page, on page 6, we have some more rents showing here. Some of them are a bit higher, some of them are a bit lower. We got some at $11.50 and $9.50. And we also have some at $7.75. So there's a variety of rents that we have for this property. On page 7, we are showing all the subject property leases that are shown here. And it's consistent with the range. The range that we have here is from $7.75 up to $16.25. And there's a variety of rents there. Some of the leases have been longer term. I'm on page 8 right now. What we have is, in total, you'll see all the different premises that we have here that show all the individual units and the model rents that we've used. What we have here is we have a total potential rent of $896,480 with a $96,948, and our rent is $9.24. We have a vacancy loss of 2.5%. and expenses of 2% and a shortfall of 3.75, we come up with a net operating income of $847,498, using a cap rate of 6.3% because it is a new building in a very desirable area. We come up with a value of $13,452,000. So what I've done is I've taken a variety of comparables that are all in the southwest quadrant. They're on Lorimer, they're on Henlow, Skirfield, Benno, and Skirfield. What you're going to see here is all my comparables are pretty much the same because it was just easier to do it because all the properties are in the southwest quadrant in the Fort Garry Industrial Park, so I use the same rents mostly. And once again, we're showing a range here of like $8.95 to $12.50, $11.95, $13.75. So I'm comfortable with the rents that we've used, and the model supports that. So our model is showing that the rents are a bit lower than some of them, but there's a variety. There's always going to be a range. What we have here is, there's much debate with regards to, management, what's not. And what we've done as a department is that, you'll deal with situations where there's a lot of owner-occupied buildings out there. So they don't charge a 5% management fee. And so one of the reasons behind that is we want to be quite equitable to all organizations or all types of properties within the city of Winnipeg. And then what we've also noticed, and there's a lot of examples here, and the fact that we've chosen this path, and you guys have heard the argument from lots of people over and over again, is that we noticed the trend of a lot of comparable properties having management being fully recoverable. And so what I have on page 10 is just showing examples of the management fees. I understand the debate saying that the 5% management fees for other expenses, but on page 10, it's just showing you a comparable property on Lorimer that there's a management fee for the first property here of the limited company. They're paying 87 cents towards management as a part of their regular lease. Another one at 87 cents. Some of them don't, but this is the general trend that we have. For capitalization rates on page 11, these are industrial properties. This is a multi-tenanted. So our range is from 6.34 to 7.80 because it's in the southwest quadrant and it's in a desirable area, which is why our cap rate's a bit lower at the 6.3%. I have on page 12, we just have an overview of the cap rates that we've used with some industrial properties. And on page 13, we have the non-recoverable expense sampling. What we've learned through our process is that there's been board decisions in the past with regards to leasing commissions, tenant inducements, allowances, and free rent. Municipal board decisions have said that we do not include those as deductible expenses for valuation. Because everyone has heard this, that concludes my formal presentation for this property.
Thank you very much. Mr. Slaughter, any questions to the assessor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Froelich, with regards to your last topic, the management allowance, What we're doing today is to determine a market value of the property, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And we're doing that via one of the three approaches, the income approach, which recognizes total revenue minus total expenses to come to an income. We stabilize that, and then we capitalize that into a value, correct?
That is correct.
And you agree that in the attainment of that revenue that we're assessing, there are expenses that exist that are recognized in the market and are very real, such as professional fees, leasing commissions, you mentioned tenant inducements. Those are real expenses and they're necessary for that revenue.
That is correct.
But if I understand correctly, the approach is to not include those in this analysis, in this income approach.
That is correct.
So that was the elimination of what was a 5% allowance that's previously been applied in addition to a 2%, which I think is typically for structural reserve. Is that correct?
It could be a variety of factors.
I think that's all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ripley, any questions on the assessment?
I'm fine, thank you.
Ms. Stevens, any questions?
Well, this is just out of interest because I know that you said your average rent came out at $9.24. Is that correct? Yeah. I'm just wondering, when the model's spitting some of these out, some of these spaces are almost identical, and yet it's like there's two of them down. Like the fourth and the fifth one down there, almost exactly the same amount of space, and one comes out $3 more a square foot than the other one.
Well,
maybe you haven't got an answer to it, but it just seems a little odd.
it does seem odd, and I will leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
And I appreciate you not probing any further.
That's it, but thank you.
Thank you. I have no questions. I proceed with your brief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have on page 2 the summary, page 3 is the overhead map. Mr. Froelich had described the property. I don't think there's much for me to add. It's a newer building on Wilkes Avenue. When originally constructed, Wilkes connected through to Kenniston, which of course it doesn't now, but the property is performing well. And it's a standard flex warehouse in 2 different buildings. And you'll see on the income statements that they actually separate those 2 buildings into 2 different statements, just to give a heads up on that. So if I can direct your attention, we'll go straight through to page 7 because there's no other information about the property physical characteristics I wish to bring forward that haven't already been described. And you'll see at the top of page 7, we do an analysis of the actual rents. We're following the same logic in a fee simple valuation as the city, that what we're looking at is market. So we're trying to determine market rent, but we typically have come to the conclusion that market leases, those that are an arm's length leases, typically close to the reference date, that extend through for some time, they're often the best indicator of market because they reflect the market's opinion of that exact space. So it's an interesting question, Ms. Stevens, about why the model has such variance, and I don't think either Mr. Froelich or I could answer why the model does, but you'll see the same sort of variance in the actual property. And what that reflects often is that size can be a factor, economies of scale, but especially with properties like this, you have varying degrees of finish. The property or the units that have a greater degree of finish often have a build-out that the landlords pay for. So a great example is, you'll look at unit 11-1109, it's the third from the bottom. That rent stands out as much as any low rent does, but on the opposite side. And that would often pique our interest, and we try and find out why these anomalies are happening. What happened there is that the landlord invested on the tenant's request a considerable amount for inducement costs. And because of those inducement costs, they receive this inflated rent. And that's all well and good, because what we're doing here is trying to determine what the value of this income stream is. And if I buy this property right now, I would be the benefactor of that higher lease. But I do have to understand that it costs somebody a lot of money to get that lease. And if I hope to get that lease after it expires or anything similar to it, I will have to expend a considerable amount as the owner to induce the higher rent. This will lead into my discussion on the non-recovered expenses, because this is a very important concept. It costs something to get something. But in the end, the analysis of our actual rents in place that we feel at market are very close to the city. So We think the city's done a good job, and we don't have a contention with the market rent. I just think it's an interesting discussion to go through. So the first area that we have a slight contention with is on the vacancy allowance. We have two separate documents, Mr. Chair, that will apply to all the different properties on this docket. One is a capitalization rate study that talks about vacancy as well. Maybe if I can just quickly direct your attention to that. So it's called the Altus Group Capitalization Rate Study for Industrial Properties. On page 8, we have a section of this study that talks about vacancy allowance, because we often do look at the two in tandem as far as the risk to the income that we're trying to stabilize and then capitalize on each other. And we see that on the bottom of page 8, what's been typically happening in the city of Winnipeg overall is that vacancy is very low for industrial. It's a healthy asset class. But it has been starting to increase as we come closer to the reference here slightly. And one of the main reasons for that, if you turn to page 9, we talk about, is that there is a large amount of additional inventory coming on stream outside of the city of Winnipeg. It's basically surrounding the city of Winnipeg through the capital regions in the RMs of Rosser, Springfield, McDonald, and even West St. Paul. That is causing a bit of stress on some of the existing stock in Winnipeg. So even though demand is high, or relatively high compared to, let's say, office or retail, we do have this stress of an increasing supply. We're starting to see it in the overall numbers of vacancy. So what we're suggesting is if last cycle, for example, a property such as the subject property would have been applied a vacancy allowance of 4%. And again, that allowance is supposed to look at what is the risk of the vacancy of this income stabilized over the life of the property. So you'll have peaks and valleys. You'll have periods where you have zero vacancy, but no investor would assume that the income they're buying today would have zero vacancy in perpetuity, hence the allowance. And we feel that decreasing that allowance from 4% to 2.5% has been done for the 2020 assessment is optimistic, and we don't feel it's warranted when we see the trend of an actual overall increasing vacancy, and we understand why that trend is happening, and it's because of an increase in supply in the surrounding regions. The other factor is, I'm sure the board is well aware, but the vacancy allowance actually includes a second item, and that is collection loss, bad debt. So if we look at physical statistics on physical vacancy, we have to remember that this allowance should be adding a premium to that for the risk of bad debt allowance. So for these reasons, we do not see a reason why the vacancy allowance that the market had established last cycle at around 4% should be decreasing to 2.5%. We ask that the board consider to maintain the static 4%. And again, this is recognizing the risk of vacancy over the property. If I may then turn back to our direct evidence, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Yeah. On page 7, we kind of introduce this subject, and then we veer off to the supplementary document. But I think it's very interesting that we look at site-specific reasons why an investor would likely not apply such an optimistically low vacancy allowance. In our brief on page 21, you'll find a occupancy map of the first of the two buildings. And the property manager Quadrille does this, and I think it's a very excellent tool, because what this is doing is telling their investors basically how things are going. And if you look at the colors, you'll see that basically the orange is the high risk, let's say. Those are tenancies that are coming for vacancy very soon, 2018, 2019, and then the colors will kind of cool off literally into the blues as the expiry dates go further. And I think this is very interesting. Page 21 is the first of the two buildings. And then if you go to page 27, you'll see the second of the two buildings. And you'll see a lot of orange. And you'll see why there's a lot of orange, because when you look at the expiry dates that we show on the rents that I was discussing, There's many that are coming up soon. In other words, we're standing on a precipice at the reference date where everything looks rosy, and we have rents of $16.25 for some units. This is fantastic. And we're applying an assessment that's based on this income. But hang on. Is this in perpetuity? Is this sustainable? I would suggest that there would be some unease about the sustainability of this high income that we're accepting. And we're recognizing that, for the purposes of this report, in a more market-based vacancy allowance of 4%. The next erosion to the income in the income approach, discussed on page 7 again, is the shortfall allowance. And what this is over the life of the building again, the amount that the owner expects to lose in recoverable expenses. So if I may back up, we have in the income approach 2 sets of expenses the owner will incur. There's the ones that they can typically recover from tenants. And I'll go into that in a moment when I talk about the non-recovered expenses. And then the second is the expenses that they can't recover. They're called non-recoverable. Shortfall allowance refers to the recoverable expenses that they don't recover because of the vacant space over the life of the building. So the best indicator then of what the shortfall allowance should be is a review of what the actual recoverable expenses are. And in this case for the property, the recoverable expenses are about $5.50 a square foot. I could refer you to the rent roll. It's very clear if you just add up the op costs, the min, and the property tax. It comes to $5.50. So in a case like that, or like this, what we often do is say we don't think that the typical industrial shortfall allowance of $375 is sufficient. And we'll increase that allowance to something closer to, but usually slightly less than the actual. In this case, we apply $5 a foot. So again, it's a minor difference, but I think it's important. If we're using these actual rents that are a rather optimistic look, let's be realistic about the erosions and the risks to that income. Which then brings me to the third and most controversial of the erosions. And I know each of the panel members have probably heard this many, many times. I don't think I've had the opportunity to speak to everybody myself. If I may, Mr. Chairman, I won't go through this entire document, but I'd like to hit some important points.
Yeah, I've been through it quite a few times.
May I just speak a little bit about it then?
I'm going to allow you to do whatever you wish to do with your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bearing in mind that if you go too far, you might bore us and we'll lose concentration.
No, try not to do that. So, I guess we'll start by kind of going back to what I was talking about with the incomes, that we have recoverable expenses and then there are things that are non-recovered. And those non-recovered expenses are typically necessary to drive the income in the first place. You need to pay often a landlord inducement or invest some money into the space in order to attain a higher rent. You need to pay somebody to get those tenants. You need to pay for advertising costs, leasing costs. You need to pay professionals to make sure that you're operating the property properly. And some of these expenses cannot be recovered. Now, there is something that I'd like to point out in our study, and I'll just quote it if you'd like, because I'm sure you've heard it many times. Mm-hmm. But this is through, so I guess what I'm describing right now is actual market behavior. These are real. They're real expenses. People recognize them. People know they have to pay them. Then we say, well, what does appraisal theory say about these things? Well, the number one thing is we have to determine those 2 buckets. What can tenants recover, and or owners recover from tenants, and what do not? So this comes from the appraisal text through the University of British Columbia on office property valuation. And it applies to all properties that have net rents. And I think you see that as you go through analysis of these types of rents. Operating costs and property tax, they call these recoverable expenses. This is right in the text. Operating costs such as items as payroll, cleaning, utilities, maintenance and repairs, grounds and parking area maintenance, management fees, and insurance, etc. These are recoverable expenses. And we see this. This is no surprise. Nothing has changed in the market. From the time that net leases started to be negotiated, landlords would like to recover their actual management fee. So what that means is, if your lease doesn't allow for the recovery of some of these items, like property tax or certain utilities or management fee, you have a semi-gross rent. And the practice then is to erode your face rent to come down to the net, because those are recoverable expenses and should be treated as such. Non-recoverable expenses. This is the title in the appraisal text. leasing and capital costs, the appraiser should also account for non-recoverable expenses, also called non-rechargeable expenses. The most important non-recoverable cost items to be aware of are space marketing costs, I alluded to that, which include both tenant inducements and leasing costs, and then separately an allowance for structural and mechanical repairs. Now that item I don't think we have to spend much time on because the city still is allowing the 2% that historically we believed reflected structural reserves. Just to be clear, these are capital improvements that you don't see on income statements. They're not repairs and maintenance. So now we have the appraisal theory telling us the market recognizes these, they're real, you as an appraiser have to also recognize them. There's two ways that you can do an income approach. A discounted cash flow is literally taking each year that you're forecasting in a holding period and trying to determine all the revenue and expenses. And if you do a discounted cash flow, you do not ignore leasing costs and tenant inducements. You estimate them and you apply them on an annual basis. What we're doing here is kind of a faster, more efficient valuation method by the income approach. It's called the direct capitalization. It's the same logic. And we're trying to take that forecast and we're trying to bring it into a stabilized, year one income. So the way that we do that is look at history, we look at present, and we try and forecast the future. And instead of having the ups and downs of the leasing costs and tenant inducements in every year, we apply an allowance. And that allowance is applied in appraisal practice. It's applied in assessment practice, and provinces on either side. I'm sure you've heard this before. I can quote, for example, right from the assessment manual of Saskatchewan. They say that where leases are signed on a net rent basis, the tenant also agrees to pay his share of operating costs associated with the property as defined in the lease. However, there are two areas where the property owner must cover expenses. One is non-recovered operating expenses, and the second is vacant space shortfall. We talked about that. And the unrecovered operating expenses include legal and audit fees, structural repairs, that's the structural, advertising, promotion, and leasing commissions. They're real. They're recognized in appraisal practice, they're recognized in assessment practice. The only thing that's happened in Winnipeg is that the similar assessment manual, that is the guidance for the assessor to develop their model, has dropped the definition of management, and you're left with a term, semantics. That term had a definition previously, and the definition was very close to the definitions in all other assessment manuals that we see. And that is that there are non-recovered expenses that have to be recognized in an allowance. Management expense, this is the definition. Even with net leases and competent management, there will be still additional management expenses incurred by the landlord that are non-recoverable from the tenants, and they apply 5%. So what's happened, in our opinion, is that the lack of the definition of the term management has led to the assumption that it refers to management fees. The management fees are recovered. They always have been. Nothing's changed in the market. The city should well know that. They analyze each and every rent roll through their annual submissions. Even if it was to recognize management expense, then I'd suggest that they perhaps were missing a very important appraisal theory and market behavior the whole time. And that is the costs that are necessary to generate the revenue upon which the assessments are being based. That's the short version of why we feel very strongly that there should have been no exclusion for the first time in the 20 years that I've been doing this anyway, of a very important and necessary expense allowance. And I'll be asking in each of these cases that the 5% non-recovered expense allowance be applied in addition to the 2% structural reserve. So once we make that deduction for the last of the expense deductions, we have a net operating income, on page 8, of $778,630. That is actually nearly bang on to the actual net operating income of the property, which is odd. We shouldn't look at the actual NOIs because you're looking at 1 year and our goal is to stabilize. But it's interesting, it's almost bang on. So too our non-expense allowance, almost bang on to the actual non-recovered expenses in the property at the reference date. That's simply coincidence. I wouldn't say that we should rely on that. We take that income, we capitalize it at 6.3%. I think that's a very aggressive and very optimistic capitalization rate. It's at the low end of the range, but I agree with Mr. Merrick that it's a well-located property. It's performing well. So in other words, if we're not recognizing some of these risks and erosions in the capitalization rate, which is often how investors would do it, we must recognize it in our analysis of the income. And so after capitalization, our value becomes $12,359,000. And in the appendix, Mr. Chairman, is basically just the city's assessment documents and the reference date, rent roll, and income statement. Just as a heads up, it's very hard to read, and also it's split into the two buildings. So if you look at one income statement, keep in mind there's a second one you have to add.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Fuller, do you have any questions of the applicant?
What is the drop date for the valuation for the 2020 assessment period?
The reference date?
Yep.
April 1st, 2018.
Okay, and so when we're collecting data or looking at data, anything beyond that would be post-reference, it would not be eligible for valuation purpose?
That's correct.
Okay. I have some rebuttal information with regards to vacancy rates that I'd like to go through.
Okay.
And so what I have here is just three significant players in the commercial real estate market within the city of Winnipeg. The first one I have here is the industrial park report from Colliers for the fourth quarter of 2017 before the April 1st reference date. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go over some of the highlighted portions here, just talking about Southwest Winnipeg. So if you go on page 2, almost 2/3 of the way down, Winnipeg's southwest sector experienced further reduction in its vacancy rate by decreasing from 0.054% to 0.23%. Inventory levels in this sector are at an all-time low, with less than 40,000 square feet available in the year end of the market. Opportunities to enter this popular market are extremely limited due to the scarcity of property. So we always talk about supply, you also got to talk about demand. So when we look at one of the major players that are located on this property, 1099 Wilkes, with a significant vacancy issue going to be taking place in 2019. That's Frito-Lay. They're paying $8 a square foot rent. That's a great rent. So obviously the owner, obviously the owner is not going to probably want to leave that location. So I'm not too sure if vacancy is a real issue for this particular property in this situation. On the next page, page 5, continuing with the trend. Winnipeg Southwest, lack of inventory continues to stymie the entrance to the Winnipeg most sought-after market, especially for tenants seeking units over 10,000 square feet. As vacancies arrive in the marketplace, they do not linger through the sector rental rates, and some of the highest are in the city. The trends that I've already read, there's a little table here where they're showing the vacancy rate. So in the second quarter of 2017, the vacancy rate was 0.54%. In 2017, it was 0.23%. So when we're using 2.5%, I think we're being very generous. And the next one's just showing what the average rent here is and how it's increasing. I am now referencing to Capital Commercial Real Estate. Just a little overview of the city of Winnipeg. In the southwest quadrant on the left-hand side, I have that highlighted. Just showing that the vacancy rate is 0.1%. That they're showing at the end of the fourth quarter of 2017. Next part I'm referencing is Cushman Wakefield. The Cushman Wakefield part looks at the following information, just a market overview. They're showing that the overall vacancy within the city of Winnipeg is 3% and will remain flat in 2018. Many tenants are either redeveloping or renewing their existing locations, and prices are high for comparable space. So as Rod has clearly stated, there is high demand for industrial properties within the city of Winnipeg. The overall asking rent for industrial is $7.58. This is at the higher end of the spectrum. And also continuing with what Rod says, I didn't highlight this, but we talked about supply and demand. because there's tremendous opportunities with regards to the industrial market, there's a lot of players that are looking at developing at the outskirts. We talk about the southwest quadrant. We're also talking about on the perimeter highway on the north side in between McPhillips and Route 90, or between Route 90 and Main Street. There's a lot of flex warehouse spaces that are being developed. So we got to look at supply, but we also got to look at demand. And it just talks about good quality spaces that are being found out quickly. And in the Cushman-Wakefield report here, Industrial 2017, I have that highlighted. It's at 0.4%. And so I believe our 2.5% is being very generous because we're not looking at what's happening in the past, in the future. We're looking at the past information. I can't present this here right now, but the trends sort of continuing in the second quarter of the college report for 2018. I'm not presenting it, but it's not there, but I just have it on file here. It's not the case here, but do owner-occupied builders or owner-occupied buildings, do they have bad debts and issue with regards to cost recovery for tenants that are not paying their rent on time?
Sorry, is this part of the rebuttal evidence?
Yeah, this is a great question. This is a great question.
Question.
So
I'll give you an opportunity to ask some questions on the rebuttal after.
yeah.
Okay, you can do that right now.
Well, maybe if you want to do
No, this is fine.
So, okay.
So the question, Mr. Froelich, is
Do owner-occupied private properties have issues with regards to collection costs for delinquent tenants?
No, they don't, but when we're valuing that type of property, we value it based on what the market would do, so we would apply similar sort of allowances with the expectation that somebody will be valuing the property based on the income potential.
Okay. So I had mentioned it beforehand, so is there a strong likelihood that Frito-Lay will be moving out of this location, moving in the third year? Because their lease is coming up, as you stated, in 2019. Do you know what's happening in the future with that tenant?
No. Even if I did, which actually I do, I can't talk about it now. What I have to do is imagine what I would do if looking at this property in April 18.
Okay.
And if I saw that Frito-Lay, as well as 8 other tenants of the 14, Frito-Lay isn't the only one.
Yep.
There's 9 tenants that are vacating within 2018 or 19.
Yep.
That's indicating their leases are coming up.
Exactly.
They might not be vacating.
That's a very good point, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman. So their leases are coming up.
Right.
What that means is there's a chance that they may renew, there's a chance they may leave and the space is taken again, maybe at a higher rent. There's a chance that the space remains vacant. So if I was doing a discounted cash flow valuation of the property, I apply a probability of what's going to happen with the renewal. It's the same logic, though, in what we're trying to do today. I like to call it just simply a feeling of unease. If I feel uneasy about the very healthy, as you say, rents in place, I recognize that either in my vacancy allowance or if I don't there, then in the capitalization rate.
Okay. Would you say that these rents are discounted compared to other market rents from the industry that is taking place for this renter? Because 924 seems to be at the low end of the scale on average.
No, I've, to the best of my ability, tried to look into every lease in the property because I try and understand why there are discrepancies. They're all at market. They're reflecting finishes or inducements by the owner.
Okay. And how is discounted cash flow relevant if you're not presenting a discounted cash flow methodology to create a value for this property?
Well, in the end, no matter what method you use to value a property by income approach, if you're doing it right, you should come to the same number, which means you can't exclude certain rates, allowances, or rationale in one approach as opposed to the other.
Yep. No other questions?
Thank you. Mr. Rupert, any questions of the applicant?
Just one, I believe. I tried to get the information out of those documents, but they're so small.
I printed a slightly larger version of Mr. question.
Well, what was the actual vacancy rate on the property?
At the reference date?
Yeah.
0.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think Mr. Diamond has made the point. Your comments about future vacancies are kind of irrelevant for our purposes. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm simply indicating, as per the reference date, they offer me no information at this point to make my calculations.
Right.
Thank you.
May I ask questions of the assessor on his rebuttal?
This is asking you questions, and then we'll let you do that.
Okay.
Steve, is there any questions?
So with your vacancy and your shortfall, have you defaulted to what the city was previously doing in previous years? Or have you defaulted to what you're actually seeing happening?
Yeah, it's a combination of both. We know that, well, this was part of the questions I had for the assessor. The fact is the Fort Garry has had historically a lower vacancy than many other areas for the industrial sector. But the market vacancy allowance, because it reflects more than just time and place for the area, it's reflecting site-specific issues and what's happening overall, what you're forecasting. It was 4% last cycle. And so when we step back and we say, well, Fort Garry is still performing strong, we have increasing supply coming right after the reference date, and the overall vacancy is increasing, we don't see evidence to reduce that market allowance. Certainly not to the time.
So that was the, okay. So and is the $5 shortfall the same thing? And you didn't see that was the previous number that had been being used, and you didn't see any change, enough of a change in the market to warrant that?
No, that's an analysis of the actual recoverable expenses
For that building?
For that building.
Okay, so that was site-specific?
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I had, thank you.
Okay. So I've seen situations before, and I'm not accusing you, where an applicant will come before us and say, you know, the city's model is basically by we've got lower rents and we should really use the actual rent that we're getting, which in this case is pretty well what's happening, even though it might be model. It seems to be pretty bang on because your numbers are not far apart.
Right.
But still, and they'll have, and because of that, they'll have a lower NOI because they're receiving lower rents there. But they're happy to take the city's vacancy factor, even though because they have a lower rent, they have no vacancies. They're happy to take the city's shortfall allowance, even though they have no shortfall, because they have no vacancies, if you get my drift.
I completely do.
And I'm not saying you're doing that, because you came across very credibly. But in this situation, and as Mr. Whitman pointed out, if in fact the vacancies do increase, that'll be a matter that you will have to determine in the next assessment role, where you can show the situation, and the situation change with post-reference information, which would maybe then lower your assessment, but I don't see how it reflects in the 2018 valuation for the 2020 tax roll.
Very fair comments, Mr. Chairman, if I may address
and I can address them, certainly.
Yes. The first one, I agree with you. I think it's inappropriate to come in and accept or cherry pick certain parts of the allowance. I try every time I come into this hearing to do an analysis in full, and there are many times that I will actually apply a higher rent if the evidence suggested, higher than the city. I wouldn't be here if I didn't think the overall value was supposed to be lower, or I wouldn't be here at all if it shouldn't.
Right.
So it's an analysis, and I think it's a very fair point, and I think people should be held to that, to not just cherry pick the points that they want.
And I wasn't accusing you, Mr. Slaughter.
No,
I think your position is very credible.
Yeah.
So my comment was maybe about situations I've seen in the past that don't reflect on you.
Yes,
Okay,
and thank you very much. To the second comment, though, I respectfully disagree completely.
Okay.
What we are trying to do when we value a property, as I mentioned at the beginning, take an income stabilized, and we're forecasting into the future. That's the point of the income approach. We don't know the future. We can't talk about the future. I mean, we may know it sitting in this room, but we can't talk about it. We can't allow it to influence our opinion of value. But what an investor is doing is saying, I've got this income, I'm going to buy this income. What's going to happen to the income? If they think the income is going to escalate, they would apply a lower capitalization rate. They're very optimistic. If they think there's risk to that income, they will apply a higher capitalization rate. The vacancy allowance, in my opinion, is a subset. It's recognizing risk as well. So I guess what I could say is that if I have 9 out of 14 leases expiring in a year, that does not bring me confidence. It brings me unease. That would affect my risk perception of the property. Perhaps it would be better for me to say that the capitalization rate should be increased. I haven't chosen that method because we're talking specifically about vacancy. Right. And that's why I'm recognizing the allowance.
Okay, but the other factor would be if you have a large tenant who has a low rental, and if there's a very, very stable rental market for the property, that could be an advantage to a purchaser saying, there's only $9 rent on that piece now. It's coming vacant. I either have an opportunity of increasing the rents significantly, the tenant wants to stay there, or let them go and I can rent it out at the market at a lot higher price.
Yeah.
So the Frito-Lay, for example, tenant,
right.
And we can't look at that now because we don't know what's going to happen there. But I'm just saying, but if you're using your approach, that would be actually maybe they said they're going to pay more for the property because you can see a higher income stream coming in. in the future.
But Mr. Chairman, it works both ways.
It does.
So the rent that I mentioned, that sticks out at 1625, that we're applying in our analysis, I know, the investor knows, the owner knows, that's not sustainable.
Okay, and I see your argument there too, is you're saying that we have to invest a lot of money into this property to get this, but that is the same thing as saying if I were to, renting cars, for example, I can rent a Cadillac for a lot more than I can rent a Chevrolet. You don't get more money for your investment, because if you improve your investment, to make it, to get a higher rent, you've actually improved the property, so that's a capital investment.
Yeah,
It enhances the value of the property as a whole.
right, but I guess the point with that allowance, and now we're kind of veering back to the non-recovered discussion.
Right.
The point of that is that it's not a one-time thing. You don't put in the money for that tenant, get 1625, and you're done. It's ongoing through the life of the property, hence it being an allowance in the stabilized approach. And you're always going to be facing, not all the time, there might be years when you have zero non-recovered expenses. But no investor is going to buy the property in that year and assume that they're going to have zero expenses in perpetuity.
Okay.
Right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I'll let you ask any questions of Mr. Froelich insofar as his rebuttal is concerned.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
So the first, Mr. Froelich, I think you touched on this, but you quote statistics about the vacancy in the southwest sector for the industrial. And those numbers, I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, would include all properties, which means it's including owner-occupied industrial properties.
It's under that assumption. I'm speculating. I didn't conduct a study, so.
Yeah, no, that's fair. If it were, though, you'd agree that that would, of course, deflate any vacancy allowance compared to the investment market.
Yep.
Yeah. And it also mentions here that, and I think you alluded to this, that Southwest Winnipeg has been performing well over the last number of years. But you agree with me that the city applied a vacancy allowance, which is based on, again, a future expectation of 4% last cycle.
Yeah. And the trends, we base our information on what happened. So the reference period that we used in 2018 was April 1st, 2016. We would have based our vacancy rates on similar data.
Okay.
So right now, so if it was 4%, chances are vacancy in on April 1st, 2016 was probably around maybe 2%. So we used 4% to be sort of fair, because a lot of times our positions is that, we understand there's a wide variety of situations in the marketplace. We're not cherry picking though.
Right.
We're always being a bit more conservative in our estimates. So if they're showing less than 1% in my 3 documents that I'm showing here today, and we're using 2.5, I think we're being generous. So when we look at what occurred here in 2016, chances are it's probably 2%. I don't have access to that information right now, but that's what I'm speculating. And with regards to the questions with regards to outliers, so what we do, and this is from my office experience as well, is when we create a model, how everyone sees our 20 to 80% ratios that we have here, we take out the outliers. So when we do our modeling, we take the ones that are really, really low, we take out the ones that are really, really high. There are situations that Mr. Slaughter and I have been exposed to with a Bank in Nova Scotia rent, which is like $10, I think, on Marion or something like that. That's not indicative of the marketplace. Meanwhile, when we have rents of $45, bank rents that are north of $40, we're not including, that's not our model rate either.
Right. But to be clear, though, you're saying that the actual vacancy in the sector is what's driving the model.
That is correct.
But when we come here today, we're looking at it a little closer with site-specific lens, is that correct? And would then projected vacancies in the very near future, would that influence, do you think, the allowance that an investor might apply?
Well, because our drop-down date is April 1st, 2018, and I don't want to be the type of person who sucks and blows, because in some regards as well, like, Mr. Slaughter and I dealt with another property here right now with regards to we signed an agreement on it where the vacancy rate's moving down, moving forward, but looking at what had happened in the 2017 mailer and the 2015 mailer, I made the appropriate adjustments. So when we do site-specific valuations at here, it's always model-generated. There is some latitude here, but as Mr. Slaughter clearly stated, the actual vacancy right now is at 0 for this property. So I'm comfortable with our 2.5 that we're using, which is why I'm defending it appropriately.
So if the vacancy was 25%, would we apply 25% to it?
No, because what ends up happening is when we're looking at a vacancy of 25%, once you do the income calculations, the value becomes almost, you know what I mean? It's almost that trade-off whereby there's hardly any value to the property because when it's that high. But what will happen, and Mr. Slaughter and I have looked at this as well, is that we'll never go in situations where we'll use actuals, but we'll try to make adjustments that we think are fair and reasonable. Like for the one that we agreed upon, if I'm speaking out of turnaround, you can stop me at any time. There were some vacancies at the 62 Scurfield building that were like 25% in a couple of years, but the average was a bit lower than that. So I didn't do the average one, but we came to an agreement that we thought was fair.
Yeah, so I guess the question I asked was if for 1 year the vacancy was 25%, that happened to be the year that the reference date, and you answered that you wouldn't, and I agree, you wouldn't and you shouldn't.
Yeah.
But if the vacancy allowance was 25% for 3 or 5 years, then you would probably be recognizing a higher than market vacancy, correct?
Without a question.
Right. And so conversely, when the property is performing very well at 0%,
Yeah.
we wouldn't be applying 0%.
No, and we're not using 0% either, because there's always going to be a vacancy. I had a situation when I worked with office properties. We have this great performing building at the corner of Grant and Keniston. It's the OFB building. That's where the original Joe's is. If you're looking at the mailer history on this, if you're looking at and this is a property that I had with Kerry in 2016 or 2014. Our model rent was $15, and I think the actuals were $13.50. And what I had argued is their business model, because we'll have business models whereby some business owners are barely getting their cost of recovery, but they would rather have a tenant in there, and their valuation is based on capital appreciation of why they keep it. They're not looking at the income, but as an investor, we're always looking at the income. But in that situation here, with regards to the property on Keniston and Grant, I had argued and lost that our vacancy was very generous, and the reason why is because of the fact that we went with the model, but the actual performance of the vacancy was very low. It was like, I think we were giving like an 8% vacancy at the time, and the actual 3-year average was maybe 3. So it's food for thought. Hopefully I was too long-winded there.
No, this is good, and I thank the board for allowing us to discuss this now because it applies to every property.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll carry forward without the evidence having to be
Right.
read each time.
No, because everything else will be, it was a pleasure dealing with Mr. Slaughter on these properties.
Oh.
And I appreciate the valuation work that he's done on this.
Thank you very much. Sorry, but just one last question, because this is a very good discussion.
Yep.
We're talking about how the city estimates vacancy allowance and what it really represents, and it's not just a time and place, it's looking at the history of the property to give us an indication of what happens, what's happening around the property, and of course what we're trying to do with that is estimate what we anticipate happening. That's the whole purpose of the principle of anticipation of income approach. Use history and current to figure out what's going to happen. So the last part of my questions, Mr. Merrick, is, and I want to be careful about not going post-reference here, but you would agree that in April 18, if I'm standing looking at this property and I have an interest in purchasing the property and I think great rents, low vacancy, you would agree that I would be aware that around the city, especially just down in the arm of McDonald and especially in the arm of Rosser, there is significant development being placed as far as infrastructure for what would be a massive increase in supply in the industrial market after April 18. Would you agree?
And that would be resolved in the 2022 assessment.
Fair comment. I respectfully disagree with that because we're trying to estimate.
But how we do valuation, though, is we look at the past, we don't look at the future. The motivation of a potential buyer and circumstances, people are developing properties all around, but we're looking at what's happening as of April 1st, 2018 and in the past. We're not looking at the future. It's still market value, but the methodology and how we create a value is different.
So we'll say this, you would agree that that would be a factor in an investor's mind, but you disagree that we should be talking about it today and for assessment purposes.
Well, any wise person, if I'm fearful of my job, of potential job cuts, I'm not thinking about upgrading to a larger house.
Right.
So I'm not going to make a rational decision if I'm worried about this. That's why the terminology that she used was actually really good. The feeling of unease. I like that. That's a great adjective. So kudos to you on that.
Thanks very much. So that's all the questions. I would like to say something in summary, though, that will pertain to all the properties at the end.
And you want to do it now or at the end?
Mr. Froelich?
I wasn't prepared to. Would you mind going first, Rod? Or
Sure, yeah.
Because I just,
I just and I understand the board's concern.
Or if you'd rather just
Mr. Wait to the last?
Or we could save it for
hearing
later
you want
on.
to? It's up to you. I don't
No,
know.
I'll say it now, actually, because it's kind of fresh. It's a very interesting
So,
discussion.
go ahead then.
Yeah, it's just that I want to stress that what we're trying to do in a market value approach, an income approach, at least from an appraisal standpoint, is stabilize an income and determine the future. I mean, that's the language in the text, the future benefit of, the present value benefit of the future income. And a key part of that is the principle of anticipation. We can't know what happened in the future. We can't do that. But we have to understand what an investor knows at the reference date and how that makes them feel about the income. And that is a key principle in valuation. So I wanted to make that point because I think I agree with Mr. Froelich that we can't say, look at all the product out there and the vacancy is now X. We can't do that. But we definitely should be saying, in April 18, I know the supply is going up. How does that make me feel? And recognize that in the valuation. Thank you.
I guess in summation, when you look at the market valuation for all these properties, we're doing the 2020 and 2021 assessment years. We base all of our valuation as of April 1st, 2018. Anything that takes place after April 1st, 2018, that's our drop dead date. So we don't know what's going to happen in the marketplace. It could go up, it could go down. We don't know what's taking place. So when we're looking at it, we base all of our information on income expense mailers that are from 2017 or before April 1st, 2018 in our valuation process. I'm comfortable with the valuations that we've provided here today.
Okay, and I can say that we see both sides of this, and we've got to determine which one we're going to follow, and you'll find out when we make our decisions.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Oh, do you have
May
a
I
question?
ask a question?
Sure, who do you have the question of?
Mr. Falk.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to clarify that you used drop dead date of April 2018.
That's our reference period, yes.
Yes.
So
And is it fair to say then that your model does not factor any information into the calculations that comes after that drop dead?
no, because we use the 2017 mailers for all of our inputs. So the information that we get for this, we don't base it on 2018 mailers. Actually, there's a situation that I have here where I have the 2017 mailer and the 2018 mailer because their year end was February 28th, 2018. So that's eligible because I've come across situations whereby there's discrepancies, and I don't know if it's on purpose or not, but in the valuations that's being presented, sometimes the rents that are presented are lower than the actuals that we see, that we generate our models on.
Now I forget your answer.
Sorry.
One word answer, please. Yes or no?
For the valuation for 2020,
Correct.
it is imperative, which is why we ask for non-compliance, to receive the 2017 mailers, which is why we send out registered mail.
So the answer is no, we do not factor in future speculation or future.
Nothing, yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah. So this goes to your rebuttal and to your brief. So you're presenting evidence here that this area of the city has very low vacancy rate in this type of a property.
Yeah.
Is your model applying, so are these numbers on your vacancy and your shortfall?
Yeah.
Are these only for this area of the city, or is it
Well,
for industrial property citywide? Are you using, is your model
Our
using the same
shortfall
one?
rates are consistent for all industrial properties.
Okay, so that's consistent right across the city, okay.
For example, I had a hearing that, say for example, West Fair Foods, 100 Weston, that vacancy rate 6%. I do believe that the vacancy rent used in the Northwest Quadrant is 3.5%.
Okay, so this 2.5 is specific to this area of the city.
Exactly.
That's what I was looking for. Okay, thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you. I've got no questions.
Okay.
Okay, so would now be a good time to take a break and you can go get that brief that you...
Yeah, could you make a copy of Rod's brief for 72 Screwfield? Thank you, appreciate
As long
it.
as you don't write on it.
What's that?
As long as you don't write on it.
No, okay. Or, yeah, could you just make a copy? I just need the summary.
Okay.
I just need or we could use Mr. Diamond's or anyone else's, you won't touch yours. If you could just use Mr. Diamond's one and make me a copy, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Can you get break out?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I haven't read on it.
Okay.
Okay, we're back on session, and the next property we'll deal with is 72 Spearfield Boulevard. Mr. Philip, when you're ready, you can proceed.
Yeah, I'm just sort of laughing at myself here because I think, for sure. File number is 192705. Roll number is 03-065-16-0000. We have the assessed value of, for 2020 at $1,528,000. Year built was 1988. The wall height's 22 feet. And we have a leasable area of 10,800 square feet. Property owner has been compliant with regards to filling out their income and expense mailers. They do it online, so this is why the structure of it is a bit different. What's interesting here right now, so we have net income. We do see some recoveries listed here. And on page 3, what happens is we have the most recent income expense mailer for 2017 that you can see on top. That says year ending December 31st, 2017. And what's interesting about this, the tenant here, it's ER Phase Power Technicians. They've been long-term tenants. They've been in this building since 2009, and even maybe a bit longer than that, because as you could, from 2009 for sure, because at one point they only occupied part of the building, and now they occupy the entire building. For the subject property, what we have here is we have 2 spaces. They're of 8,146 square feet and 2,654 square feet. Our blended rent for both of these is $957. Using a vacancy of 2.5%, expenses of 2%, shortfall of 3.75, we come up with a net operating income of $97,817, cap rate of 6.4%. We come up with a value of $1,528,000. Similar comparables that I've used for other properties. These are all located on Spearfield. We've discussed cap rates, and that concludes my final presentation for this property.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Bullock on this?
Yeah, just a couple. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Froelich, the subject property is a mix of office and warehouse as well, is that correct?
That is correct.
So it's about, I think it has a build-out office of 30% or so. It's rear.
I have never been in this building, Mr. Slaughter, so I do not know the breakdown of it.
Okay, that's good. And the comparisons that you show on page 5, they're all down Spearfield as well.
That is correct.
These are located in 2 different multi-tenant flex properties.
Yep.
Are you aware of the build-outs in those?
I am not aware of the build-outs in those.
Would you disagree with me that many of these units will have 100% office finish?
That may be the case, but in the same regards, we're compensating with the lower rent.
Okay, that's fair enough. That's all the questions.
Thank you. Any questions of the assessor, Mr. Whitbread?
No question. Thank you.
Ms. Stevens, any questions?
So, I think I heard that the building is currently being used for both office and some warehouse?
Yeah, so...
But you've assessed it as all office space?
No, it's a flex warehouse. So all these properties have a combination. Some of them are strictly office.
With the rent, sorry, I meant.
Yeah, so with the rent for this property, you know, we have used a rent that is reflective of the flex office.
Oh, okay, so that's what that acronym means?
Yeah, flex.
Okay.
Flex warehouse.
I'm seeing office, so I didn't get the flex part of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they're flexible, so you'll have a lot of properties that are like that, you know, and so I haven't been into this unit. With some of them that we have pictures of, but with this one I do not.
Okay, that's all I have, thanks.
Thank you.
And this building, you're using a slightly higher, the model, I guess, is using a slightly higher cap rate than the
Yes.
previous one?
Yeah.
And that is why?
It's older. The previous one was built in 2000.
Okay.
This one's built in 1988.
And so
That's like
it's
staggering.
it's barely aged.
Yeah, exactly. So it's an older building, so when we're looking at this building, we're looking at a building that's 30 years old as opposed to a building that's less than 15.
Okay, thank you. You answered my question. Just so you can go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the subject property is originally 2 units, which have been combined into one for the tenant in place, located on Spurfield. On page 3, there's an overhead map. I haven't been in this property in some time, but one of our staff members inspected it during the review phase back in the summer. And they conveyed a few points about the property that I thought were interesting. One is that there's some problem with sloping in the back rear area that the owner has to address at some time. And this one makes sense. Looking at the overhead map, you can see that there's, because of the tightness of the edges of the property and the building, truck access can be rather difficult to get in and then turn around to get at the truck loading doors. Minor points, but I thought they were interesting and I wanted to convey those in our presentation. The property, it's an older property, even for this area. 1988 is kind of when this street was being, Spurfield was being developed, this part of the town. And it's starting to show signs of its age. On page 7, Mr. Bullock had mentioned this, the city applies a rent of $9.58 based on comparisons. And we are applying, again, we feel that actual rents, if they're sustaining for more than a year in the property after the reference date, and they've either been negotiated or even stepped up at what we feel is a fair rate between arm's length parties, that often reflects all the concerns that we're trying to reflect in a market rent. And the actual rent paid is $9.25 a square foot, which is a step up as of January 1st, 2017. We feel that's the best indicator of market. We have concern about the use of some of the comparisons that were discussed in the city's evidence. We're actually going to be hearing one of those properties later on the docket, and I know that some of those units can have up to 100% build out. So I'm just cautious about using those as an indicator in lieu of the rent that's actually attained. I would prefer to use the rent actually in place. So we have a rent slightly different than the city at $9.25. For the reasons described before, we feel a more overall market allowance of 4% is more appropriate. I have an error, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to now address that. The final value that we're requesting, if I may ask the board to change this, is slightly higher. The value that we're asking when we combine the revised rent, our vacancy allowance, and the cap rate I'll discuss is $1.251 million. The reason for this last-minute variance is in my review of the documents last night, I realized I made an error. The actual expenses are not $6 a square foot. They're lower than that. So we're accepting the $375 that the model produces because the actual expenses are very close to that. I had accidentally applied a higher shortfall allowance. So the next area of contention is, as discussed earlier, we do feel that these type of properties have non-recovered expenses that we find no evidence why there should be an exclusion of for this assessment cycle, and therefore we ask for the total 7%, which is 5% of the management non-recovered and 2% structural reserve. And lastly, we have a slight concern with the capitalization rate. We heard earlier that newer good properties in the Fort Garry area are being applied by the model 6.3%. This is 1988. This property is quite aged now. It's showing signs of its age. I think when we get into that sort of category, a 10 basis point increase is not sufficient. So if I may just talk quickly again, Mr. Chairman, about the supplementary document that we have, the cap rate study. I'll try and keep this brief, but generally there are a few key points that Altus is trying to convey when we're looking at capitalization rates. And we've done these studies to be kind of a starting point for the market, and then we take that information and we try and do a specific summary for the subject property. The first point is, and it's not really germane to this discussion because we're not really talking about what cap rates were necessarily, but it's just important to keep in mind when we're talking about capitalization is that one of the fundamental blocks upon which the rate of return is based for an investor is the cost of money. If we do a band of investment technique and we break out what a capitalization rate really is, it's the cost of money, so the amount that they have to borrow their loan with, and then their return on their equity. So when you break down that fundamental part of the capitalization rate, just like any other investment, as the cost of money increases, typically, so too will the rate of returns expected. And we're seeing that in the market at April 18. If I can just ask you to quickly turn to, I think this is an interesting visual, page 3. We see what's happened with the cost of money. At the last reference date, it was at an all-time low, basically. It had been decreasing since the recession in 2008, and we hit a point where it was about 0.5%. Right after that reference date, actually close to the current reference date, end of 2017, Q4, we start seeing an increase, and it increased 75 basis points. So that's where we are at April 18. The cost of money has now gone up 75 basis points. Well, fine, that doesn't necessarily mean anything changed with the cap rates. It's a fundamental part of it, but what does that really mean? On page 4, we see then the effect of that on mortgage rates. And you can see that almost equal to the increase in the cost of money is an increase in the mortgage rates. What typically happens in history is that as mortgage rates go up, cap rates are usually not far behind. So, as an investor in April 18, one of my first concerns is that cost of money has increased, my rate of return should increase. And this applies to all the properties. I didn't contest cap rate on the first property, so I didn't bring it up. But it is a fundamental part of our analysis that we look at first. We then, on page 11, take a look at what's happening according to the brokers in the market. Now, we understand these are marketing materials, they're not gospel, but they do give an interesting insight into the people who know best what's happening in the market about where cap rates are going, what direction, are they up, are they down? And basically you can see that in the comparison from Q1 16, the last reference date, to Q1 18, current reference date, nothing's changed. So whether or not we use that range as gospel, the fact is that the experts are telling us that things have stabilized. And it makes sense, because what we're talking about is one of the factors of the cap rates is the supply and demand. Demand is pretty strong for industrial. Supply is increasing, that's coming, that's the anticipation that I've referred to. But counterbalancing that is the cost of money. So if this was a different docket, if we're talking about office or retail, that supply-demand component doesn't balance out the cost of money increase, and we're seeing cap rates increasing. I'm not suggesting that for industrial. What I'm suggesting is that they're stable. And the last part we look at is the site-specific characteristics of the property. This isn't from 2005, like Wilkes. This is from 1988. And it's basically when the area started development. It's an aged property, and from the reports of our staff and from discussions with the owner, it's showing signs of that age. These are things that would again cause the unease in an investor when they're looking at this income, the 925 with their erosions as a stabilized income. The range of cap rates shown by the brokers in Q1 18 shows a Class A and a Class B. This is not Class A. The Class B's range from 6.5 at a minimum to 7.25. For Colliers, we see, well, actually for all of it, yeah, it's the same for all the brokers. We've done an analysis of some properties in the market, and it's difficult to take one property and say, there, that's the cap rate, because there's so many things happening in the income, et cetera, et cetera. But you get an idea when you look at a number of what's generally happening. And what this range here that you see on page 13, we've looked at 6 cap rates, and they range from a low of 6.36 to a high of a portfolio sale that we're putting less weight on. That's higher at 7.87. But generally, we're finding they're in the high 6s. So if we accept the range that the brokers are telling us, mid-6s to low 7s for a product like this, we wouldn't think we'd be south of that. And that's why, for this property, I'm contesting that 6.4% be the capitalization rate. For this type of property, I would expect to be in the median or the middle of that range. And so we're asking the board to consider 7% for the capitalization rate. The report has pictures of each of the comparisons for the board's reference, but for brevity, I think that kind of sums up our position.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Ford?
Yeah. By any chance, Rod, I don't have it here. Do you know what was the cap rate used in 2018 for this property?
No, I don't have it here either.
I don't have it here either.
I may, actually, let me just see if I mention it in my report.
I hate to speculate because I think it may actually be higher than it was because of the size of the building, but I'm not too sure.
No, sorry, I don't have it.
Okay, no problem.
That's file.
Has the price of real estate, has the real estate market gone down for industrial properties within the city of Winnipeg?
Overall, no.
No.
When we talk about the price, though, there are two factors. One is the escalation in the income, and the second is potentially a compression in the rates of return. The last 10 years, the latter has been the driving force of increases in properties. In the last little bit, it's actually stabilized, so it's because of the increase in the market.
Yeah.
Income.
So compared to what the assessed value was in 2018, you're asking for a value which is lower in the marketplace for this property.
The 18 value was,
I have $1,277,000.
yeah. Yes, and that,
So it's $25,000, so it's not
Right.
significant, but it's just the overall trend that industrial properties haven't gone down in the city of Winnipeg, yet you're asking for a lower value.
yeah.
So I'm just asking.
Yeah, that's a very fair point, Mr. Foley, but I guess, I'm trying to look at this, I didn't represent the property last
no
night, so,
problem.
it's something definitely to consider, but I'm looking at the evidence here.
Just one other question. Did you consider using your 2% vacancy, because this has been an owner-occupied building for a long period of time, and the actuals have been zero, not 4%?
No, for the same reasons we discussed, that even if a multi-tenant property is at 0%, a market investor would never apply zero, and the same thing would apply with long-term single-tenant or owner-occupied, because an investor is looking at what's going to happen over the life of the building. So.
No other questions?
Thank you. Mr. Whitman, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Mrs. Stevens, any questions?
Just is 7%, would that seem a bit aggressive given that this is 1988? I mean, some of the other industrial buildings out there are going to be, because you're showing a range up to 7.25.
For the capitalization?
Yeah, sorry, the cap.
Yeah. Is it a bit aggressive? Well, we'll be seeing similar aged properties later on the docket, and you'll then see a consistency, I guess, if that helps at all.
Well, it's just you're showing a range, like those ranges you were showing in your report here you're showing a range of up to 7.25 for industrial, and I just think there's, having sat on many panels, there's definitely industrial property in the city that's much older than this.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair point. And what we're seeing is a range for Class B, according to the brokers, in the 6.5 to 7.25. It's corroborated by what we're seeing. Where we land in that range, very good question.
I mean, I see your point about the 6.3 for the other building, and I see that, but this seemed maybe a bit aggressive.
And that's a very fair comment. I think there needs to be an increase to the 6.4% capitalization rate based on the evidence before us. Where we land in that range, I guess I leave it to Forrest's question.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. That's all I
Yeah, I think you maybe answered my question already when you answered Stephen's question, but I'm looking at page 13 of your report.
Of the cap rate report?
Yeah, you're showing various sales that have actually taken place.
Yeah.
And I look at properties that I think are probably inferior to this one that sold for basically lower cap rates than you're asking us for. Like example would be Church Avenue, which is built in 1971, and was sold for a cap rate of 6.81%, for example.
Right.
But you indicated already that you think that maybe 7% might be the high end you should be asking for, but you do think it should be reasonable to 6.4%, is that correct?
That's exactly correct. Why I chose 7, it's a bit of, I'm in a range, I'm not sure. There is some properties that we'll discuss later that are of similar age where the model had produced 7%. There may be reasons for that, Mr. Fuller will talk
Probably
about.
based on size?
It could be, yep. And so in the end, I thought that was, if I'm going to pick somewhere in the range, that seemed like a fairly safe place.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Okay.
But Mr. Chairman, you bring up another good point about the cap rates, and it's one of the problems when you try and hone in on one cap rate, because it all depends on what's happening with the income. And it comes back to a point you made earlier, which is a great point. If you have below market rents, and an investor comes along and says, I can do better, that's the appreciation that would be reflected in a lower cap rate.
Could be.
Yeah. So, I mean, and it's why we try and caution ourselves from saying the best comparison for cap rate is number 4, because that gets a little messy.
Certainly, it also depends on the investor. Some investors may be prepared to take somewhat less than another investor may be prepared to take, and so you never know what the actual sale price of the building is going to be.
Well, yeah, we try and weed that out, though. We look into motivation for sales, and if we find anything that doesn't pass the test, we try and eliminate that.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, we'll next go on with the next item on the agenda, which is item number 5, which is 19 Skeerfield Boulevard.
Yes.
And are you ready to proceed with the color?
File number 193807, roll number 03065166200. Address is 19 Skeerfield. For 2020, we have assessed value of $4,694,000. Property was built in 1988 with an average wall height of 25 feet. We have a leasable area of 54,052. What I have here is some general pictures of the building on page 2. My guess is that Ackland's Ranger has been here for a very, very long period of time, and I'm pretty confident of that. They haven't complied with regards to filling out the income expense mailer. So all they have is expenses there. Page 5. 54,052 square feet is what we have. We're using $6.46 a square foot rent. As if you look here, the distinction here, this is a storage warehouse on the top of it, not a flex warehouse. So a storage warehouse will have more storage space, hence the rent's a lot lower than what we've had with other properties that I've shown here on Skeerfield. We have $349,176 as potential rent, vacancy at 2.5%, expenses at 2%, shortfall 3.75, coming up with a net income of $328,571. Here, using the 7% cap rate, because it's a larger building, we've come up with a value of $4,694,000. What I've done with these properties here is I've gotten other warehouses, SWHs, and you show a range of rents. All of them are in the southwest quadrant. We're on Wilson, we're on Lawson, we're on Clarence, Skeerfield, Irene, and Seal. And you could see a range of rents there that are from $5.41 to $9. What I did is I've taken a range of buildings from 1972 to 2000. As you can see, the 2000 rent's at $9. We're not using a $9 rent, but that's just showing the marketplace. The range of wall heights are between 20 and 28 feet, and the leased areas are just under the subject property at 50,000 square feet, and you can see them there. And as you can see there, my little note, I was looking for leases that were greater than 50,000 square feet. I couldn't find any in the southwest quadrant. We've discussed everything else, and I am comfortable with presenting a value of $4,494,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Slaughter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Froelich, on page 6, there are some comparisons.
Yep.
Just starting to confirm that the subject property you mentioned is a storage warehouse, so its build-out is relatively lower than a lot of the other product in this area.
Yeah, like for example, the other property that we looked at previously, that was more of a flex warehouse, and this is a storage warehouse, so that's why the rents are lower accordingly. And I do not have the breakdown of what's office, because I do believe there is an office component in here.
There is.
But
yes.
I don't know what's the breakdown.
Okay, 10%.
Okay.
So we're looking at the comparison and how it compares to the list on page 6 of comparable property rents.
Yeah.
And when we look at the first two, 541 to 675, now the third one, 1460 Clarence, are you aware that that has a very relatively high degree of office finish at just over 20%?
That may be the case.
Okay. And you would agree then that that's one of the factors that the model or you doing a site-specific valuation would recognize in the comparison of comparable rent stat?
We have a range of rents. The 984 would be at the higher range of rents that we have, and so we're not asking for 984.
Okay. Similarly, the fourth comparison on Scurfield, this was the Grandin Toy offices and distribution warehouse, and it has over 25% build out, and is also a very new property. So you'd agree again, you'd be looking for something lower than the rent on that for the reasons that this is a superior property to the subject.
Is it Grandin Toy because we have a food services company there?
That's the new tenant, yeah. Grandin
Okay.
Toy, when they started shutting down locations, they vacated.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that we were consistent.
Yeah, this rent is for a new
Okay,
tenant.
no problem.
100 Irene, again, that's about 15% build out. And then the last comparison, 1560 Seal, you're aware that that has a very high degree of build out for one, and secondly has a land to building ratio of 8.25 to 1. Those would both influence the rent paid by a tenant, would you agree?
That is correct.
Yeah, okay. That's all the questions, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. McQuaid?
Just one. I heard you say value $4,494,000.
So it's 694,
You missed it.
yeah.
Thank you. Clarify. No further questions.
Christine, any questions?
So just on the comps, just based on the question you just had there, so these are all storage warehouses with some level of office space. So you were trying to find similar.
Exactly,
yeah,
with the square footage. So
Yeah.
you notice here I have one 2000 building, and this is 1988, so that's at the upper range
Yeah.
here. And then I also have 72, which would be at the lower range.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my goal was to try to find comparables that were close to the effective age of the
But
property.
these are mainly storage warehouses with some office.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's all I have.
I had a unique situation a couple weeks ago with regards to an office that had a higher breakdown of office to what you would call it. And so our rent was a bit higher, but it was reflective of the quality of the office space.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no questions. So, Mr. Slavin, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the property is shown on page 2 with an overhead map on page 3. It's located just west of Waverly on the north side of Scurfield. It is a storage warehouse owned and occupied by Acklands Ranger, and Mr. Froelich is correct, it's been that since it was constructed.
Yeah.
It's one of the first properties I've inspected.
You know, it's funny because I used to, sorry if that's aside, I used to work for Winnipeg Transit, and they used to do bus services on these things, and just how it's changed so much in like the 30 years, like it's just staggering, eh?
Yeah, definitely. So, and the property has been discussed, it's 54,000 square feet, so it's with about 10% of office space in the front. The wall height is 25 feet, and there are dock level loading doors along the west side of the building. So we have a fairly standard storage warehouse, and then the question is on page 7, what is the appropriate market rent to apply to this owner-occupied building? And the city has a good range, although when we look at some of the characteristics of those properties, we see that the ones on the high end have reason to be on the higher end. And in my opinion, the first two that Mr. Froelich had presented were actually probably better comparisons. And if you recall, they were $541 a foot and $675 a foot. We have a range here on page 7. I'll just quickly go through each one, and there's also photographs of each comparison starting on page 12. Index 1 is a standalone industrial property in St. James. It's very similar to the subject in that way. It's a little smaller, 40,000 feet. It has similar finished area of 10%. It is older at 1973, and the rent paid is $5.68 a foot. Index 2 is on Lowson. This is the same comparison, number 2, as what the city had actually. Office component is approximately 7%, but the land-to-building ratio is 5 to 1. It's a greater land-to-building ratio, or nearly 5 to 1. Almost the same size, almost the same age, and it is commanding $675 a square foot. So we have $568 and $675, and the aforementioned $541 from the city's first comparison. Index 3 is not a great comparison, I admit. It's not standalone. It's within a larger property, which features 20-foot wall height, and it's commanding $351. I would suggest that that's a better comparison for just the sort of the warehouse component, so 90% of the subject property. But we need to up that to consider the 10% office. The fourth comparison is on Omens Creek. It's 100 Omens Creek, built in the 80s, 50,000 square feet, 3.43 to 1 land building ratio, and it commands $5 a square foot. It also has 28-foot wall height, which is superior to the subject, but overall it has less build-out, so I'd suggest an upward adjustment for that comparison. Index 5 is in what used to be considered the Cadillac of warehouse properties, 1370 Sandy Place, in the Fort Garry area. It was demised into multi-tenants many years ago, but it is 100% HVAC throughout the warehouse. It's an excellent warehouse. It has between 24 and 34-foot ceiling heights. We feel this is a very good comparison to the subject, also built in the 80s, and it commands $6.05 a square foot at the reference date.
Can I ask, what tenant was that for the Sony placement, Mr. Slaughter, if I can ask?
I don't have that.
Okay, because I was trying to match it on the mailer,
Yeah.
and I couldn't find it either.
Well, it definitely comes from our internal records.
Okay.
We work the property, so. But sorry, I don't have the actual unit number. Number 6 is Keewatin, 959 Keewatin. This is 27,000 square feet, so it's smaller, but it is an older property at 1979. Similar ceiling height, it commands $549 a square foot. The next is also on Keewatin at 855. It's a newer property built just before 2000. 27-foot wall height, smaller area of 24,750. It commands $6.20 a square foot. The second last is on Sherwin, 971. It's a lower wall height of 20 feet. It's a little older, and it's half the size of the subject. Commands $6 a square foot. And the very last is, again, a portion of a larger property demised into multi-tenants. And it's paying $5.95 a square foot for 46,000 square feet. I apologize. This is a standalone building. This is a clothing manufacturer, actually Canada Goose, where the tenant moved in and the landlords put in $1.7 million to entice them to move to that location. And it's actually, they leased 2 halves of the total building. At least the first half, and then subsequently leased the second half, both at $5.95 a square foot. So we have quite a range. We have a range that, on the low side at $350, but I would consider that only for warehouse. So basically, we're in the 5s. In our comparisons, we come up to a height of $675 a square foot, but for reasons mentioned, I think there should be downward adjustment for the subject. And we recognize that the rents that the city shows that are higher than that are for very good reason. So with all evidence presented, I suggest that we should be somewhere at just above the median. The median here is $5.95 a square foot. So what we are applying is $6.20 a square foot. And that seems to fit in again when we hone in on the best comparisons, including Sony Place and Lowson. So $6.20 a square foot is what we suggest as a market rent. For the reasons we mentioned before, we feel a vacancy allowance of 4% should be applied. We accept $375. It's close to the actual expenses incurred at the property for the shortfall rate. We do feel that even in an owner-occupied circumstance, that non-recovered expenses would be something an investor would consider when purchasing the property and valuing it based on an income approach. So we ask for 7%. And this property was built in 1988. For the reasons that we mentioned earlier, it would fit in that range for Class B product between 6.5 and 7.25. The model has presented a 7% capitalization rate for this 1988 property. We accept that. So we've made some adjustments to the market rent and then other adjustments to the allowances and non-recovered expenses. With a 7% cap rate, brings us to a value of $4,158,000. And I think that completes our presentation, Mr. Chairman. In the appendix is photos of the comparisons and the assessment information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bullock, any questions?
What's the goal of the assessment department when it comes to market valuation? overall what we're trying to achieve.
Taxes? What's the goal of the assessment?
Yeah. In terms of market valuation, for when we create assessment role, what are we trying to do as a general guideline?
Market value?
Market value, but we have a range. Like, so we want to go. The goal is to be plus or minus 5% for market valuation. You know what I mean? So if it's plus or minus 5%, we feel that we feel that the assessment is pretty bang on. Our market rents are only 26 cents difference. That doesn't seem to be very significant, so that's pretty well within our range. You're not being super aggressive there, so it's just, I'm wondering why you didn't just accept our rent that we've used.
Well, that's not what I'm engaged to do. First of all, I'm engaged to do an analysis to the best of my ability. How aggressive I am is not a function of what of my position. It's a function of the data that I find and the discrepancy between my data and the city's data. And you're right, in this case, it's not much of a difference, but you can see that it makes a difference to the overall value for a property this size when capitalized, and it makes a difference to the taxes, which is why the client is asking to look at this.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Cooper, any questions?
None.
Stevens, any questions?
No, I do not.
I don't either. Thank you. Okay, so our next property, 69 Scripper Boulevard. When you're ready, Mr. Fuller,
Bear with me.
no problem?
Subsequent data that I had. File number 193710. Roll number is 03065154200. For 2020, we have assessed value of $5,462,000. We have the property built in 1999, wall height's 20 feet. We have a leasable area of 29,004. Property owner has been compliant with regards to filling out income and expense mailers. Just as a general comment, yeah. They're so hard to read, these mailers here. What we have here is we have the subject range showing all the rents of the range that we have. So we have a range from $10 to $16, you know. Got a couple older leases here that are at $10 that are the PGW Defense Technologies. I don't know if they were step up or whatnot, I haven't seen that, but the initial lease was signed. I didn't even include that in my mailer, so I don't know if they're step up. Flex Warehouse, similar to the one, not the last one, but the one prior to that. But we do, we have a $362,948 as a total potential rent to come up with a model rent of $12.51. 2.5% vacancy, expenses of 2% shortfall, $375 to come up with $344,078. Here we're using a 6.3% cap rate to come up with a value of $5,461,000. What we're showing here is that we're showing some comparable rents on Skirfield that are arranged from, say, $10.75 to $13.75. This is an overview. And I actually have some pictures that I came across before the deadline. Robert, do you have any problems with regards to me showing these pictures here?
Can I see it first to
Yeah, first.
verify written statement information?
Well, the thing is, they are post-reference because I just got them recently. I'm not concerned, there's no rent listed there. I'm just wanting to show the quality of the finish.
That's fair.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So, well, I could pass it over.
That's fine.
Because sometimes you don't have pictures of these type of properties, so I always think it's advantageous to show these to the board. So as you can see here, this is something that just came out recently, so it is post-reference. But I just did this to show the quality and definition of the building. Just under 2,000 square feet, located in southwest Winnipeg. They have one great door that's 12 by 14, clearance height of 16.4. There's a sump pit, fully sprinkled, zoned M1. And to show just the breakdown of what some of the office space and some of the industrial space is in here. This is only 2,000 square feet, right? So looking at this property, I don't know if it's 500 square feet office and 1,500 square feet office, but actually here's a great layout over here. Look at that, eh? This is the benefits of printing these out just for information. So the reason why there's flex warehouse finished is because in this situation here, they're almost a 50% split between office and warehouse space, which is what's driving the higher rent of the $12 as opposed to the ones that we're looking at where we're at $6. Back of it just shows where it's located at, but I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with that. And that concludes my formal presentation for this property. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the assessor?
No questions.
Okay. Mr. Rupert, any questions?
No questions.
Stevens, any questions?
No.
And I don't either, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so in our evidence, page 2 is a photograph of the property as well. Page 3, we have the overhead map, so it's a multi-tenant flex warehouse kind of stretching along from Smithfield. It has a 20-foot ceiling height. There are 13 units currently occupied by 9 tenants, because 3 tenants occupy 2 units combined. And it was constructed in 1999, and the total area is just under 30,000 feet. So we turn then to page 7, and we've looked at, again, the actual rents in place, unless we find information that would lead us to determine that the actual rent is not at market. We feel that this is the best representation of market. And depending on the unit, depending on the location of the unit, depending on the build-out, the rents can fluctuate. And so we have a high of $16 a square foot for the very front units, to a low of just under $10 for a larger space near the middle that the federal government leases. And in the end, the range, the average is just over $12.50 a square foot, and that is almost bang on with what the city's done. So, again, we have no contention with that. But there's a reason why we don't. What the actual leases determine that. So, we then turn to the vacancy allowance, and this is a similar circumstance with the multi-tenant property we discussed at Wilkes. Again, we feel uneasy about a very optimistic vacancy allowance when we're also applying a very optimistic capitalization rate. And on a site-specific basis, when we look at what's happening in the property, we want to make sure that there's nothing that causes us unease. In this case, Unit 12 and 13 are on an overhold since the lease expired in 2016. Doesn't mean that they're going to vacate, doesn't mean that it won't be occupied soon after, but it is something that adds to the risk. And in our analysis, we're applying that risk to the vacancy allowance rather than the capitalization rate. The actual expenses at the property are $5.50 a square foot, recoverable. Therefore, we've increased the shortfall to $5 a square foot. And again, we've applied the non-recoverable allowance of 7%. I apologize, Mr. Chairman. These statements are so poor to read. My eyesight's bad enough, and I don't barely see it. But what you will find, and again, I want to caution about using just the income statements at a given point in time, because that's not the exercise to assess the income as of April 18. It's to assess or capitalize a stabilized income using the information before us. But it's coincidental that this property, on page 23, we'll see the last of the expense items. And typically on an income statement, it'll go through the revenue, then it'll go through recoverable expenses, and then it'll lastly go through non-recovered expenses. And what we'll see is that the item professional fees, which combine marketing costs and consulting fees, appraisal fees, total $17,808. You have to take my word for it.
It's right in the middle
Right
there,
in the
right?
middle,
Yeah,
yeah.
at the bottom of
Where
the
will
line.
this
You're looking at right now? Sorry.
Oh, sorry, it's on page 23, and the line item is still in the expense category, but non-recovered. If we zoom over to right in the center, we have the year-to-date budget.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm relying on that is because the statements are only a partial year.
Yeah.
But you'll see this, or you would see this consistently, that these are very real expenses. And this is, I wouldn't suggest that we use this year, that's not the purpose of an allowance, we're supposed to amortize it. But the point is, these are real. They occur, they're recognized, they're necessary, we're allowing them. In the end, the NOI that you'll see below that line, about 5 lines below, is... Geez, I can't read.
302,892?
Yeah, that's great, thank you. 302,892. And now if we refer back to our page 8 is our evaluation summary. And again, I say this with caution. This shouldn't be an exercise we typically do because it's just 1 year. But I just wanted to show the board that when we treat these expenses properly, we'll come in at an NOI that's appropriate. We're at 318, the actual is 302. I think it's a good test of this expense item. So we have our net income of $318,254. We're accepting the capitalization rate. We did have a little difficulty at first. We feel that is a very optimistic capitalization rate. Property's built in 1999. It's in a great area. These are all the factors Mr. Fuller had discussed. I guess I just want to stress that if we're not recognizing any of the risks in this property that we've described in the capitalization rate, we feel we have to think twice about the vacancy allowance. But we're accepting 6.3 in this case, which would bring us to a final value of $5,052,000. The last thing I'd like to mention in the evidence in the income statements are, this is the same property manager quadrille as we discussed with Wilkes. So on page 19, you'll see that same leasing plan. And again, I mentioned at the beginning that orange is the concern. So when you see more orange in these plans, it means things are changing quick. That's all, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the
Yeah,
applicant?
the information that we're looking at page 23, was that the year-to-date budget or was that the actuals?
That's the year, so this is the submission they would have submitted for the reference date.
Okay.
But I think this is like what you had mentioned, Mr. Froelich, where their rent roll is as of the reference date rather than the year-end 2017.
Okay.
So they submitted their income statements, but unfortunately it's only to date.
Okay.
So what I'm asking the board to do is we look over to the budget. Again, I'm not putting great weight on it.
Okay, no problem. I just wanted to make sure because there's a huge difference between like 1,300 and 17,000, so that's what I'm asking.
You'll see that in all of the items
Okay.
because of the fact it's only reflected on,
Yeah.
I think, 4 months.
Okay, no problem. That's fair. I just wanted to understand that. One other question here because I acknowledge that the rents that we have are identical that Mr. Slaughter's not using for an increase. But I just want to double check here on page 20 of your brief. So we'll look at 2 things here. Page 20 and page 7. So on page 20, what I don't know what you want to look at first.
Sure, I'm on 20 now.
20? So on page 20 right now, we have for 12 and 13, Her Majesty the Queen. That's $11. And on page 7, you reported 10. And I understand that you're saying that there's some questions with regard to them not staying or leaving or how long that they're going to be there for?
No, that's not the concern.
Okay.
I can answer this very quickly,
Okay.
Mr. Froelich. If you look over from the rents, you'll see the columns OPEX, P-tax, and other.
Okay.
So these are the recoveries. This is how I determined that the total recoveries were $550.
Okay.
And I mentioned at the beginning, if you don't collect a recoverable expense, what you have is a semi-gross rent. And the proper
Okay.
treatment is that you deduct what you're not recovering to come down to a proper net rent.
So the recoverables are less here.
Yeah, and it happens
Okay,
all the time with the province. that
Okay.
There's things that...
And I realize that completely. I saw the discrepancy and I wanted to ask about it.
Great.
That makes
Great
total
point.
sense.
Thank you.
Okay. No questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Whitman, any questions?
No.
Mr. Stevens, any
No,
questions?
I'm good, thank you.
And I am as well.
Just before I start with this property, were you asking about 1460 clearance?
1460
clearance.
I think that was one of the comparisons in 19 Squarefield, was it?
Yeah, I know, I was just wondering, because it's for lease right now, and I realize it's post-reference, but you're asking me about the breakdown of the area. And so I had it here, so that's why I wanted to share it with you.
Yeah, it should have 6,553 square feet of office.
Okay. Yeah, that seems fair.
Yeah, because that's the same document I used.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I understood it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I have a question of you right now. Do you know if we have a settlement on Buffalo Place, or?
Oh, I think we still have one. Do we have?
We have one more. No, we do have one more, for sure. We may have two more,
Okay.
depending on what your answers are.
Mr. Slaughter could answer.
Yeah, I'm just checking, Mr. Chairman, and unfortunately, no, I haven't had a response yet.
Okay, so if we might have two, if we only have one, I'd say let's go ahead and get it done.
Yeah, okay.
If we have two, I think we take a short break right now.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Right here.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll give it half an hour for sure.
Okay.
So, are we hearing that one?
Do you know yet if we have an agreement on the property in Buffalo?
No, I never had a response.
Okay.
25 Squarefield or Buffalo?
No, it's 25 square feet. There's still a chance, I suppose, we heard from Buffalo in the interim. We can be hopeful, right?
Yeah.
So go ahead when you're ready.
Yep, for sure. File number is 19-2883. Roll number is 03-065-165-800. For 2020, we have assessed value of $5,181,000. Building was built in 2001. Wall height is 27 feet. We have a leasable area of 30,444, and we have a plan area of 84,091. What we have here is we have some pictures of the subject property on page 2, and we have where it's located at within the city of Winnipeg. So it's on Waverly, between Waverly and Dovercourt. What I do have here is, I do have some additional pictures here with regards to, there is some vacant space. It is post-reference. It's very similar to the other one. It has the component with regards to the location of it. It's a breakdown between office and warehouse and flex warehouse space, similar to the other properties that we have here. What we have here is the property owner has been compliant with regards to filling out the income and expense mailers. You know, we're consistent with regards to showing the management and the recoverables that can be seen here. The argument is that it's the other things that should be included. What we have for a rent roll is we're having a rent roll of $12 for both of these spaces here that are shown on page 5. And then on the next page we've got some additional rent rolls. So we've got 1025, 1050, and that's the continuation, and 1117 and $11. What I've done in this circumstances here, and I actually have, I do believe I have copies of it, I thought I did. I've also included the 2018 mailer, just because the reference period is April 1st, 2018. Their year end is 2018, so I thought it was valid to include this. We wouldn't have used this information for the model, we would have used 2017. But this is just showing what the rents are and how they may have changed. And what's interesting here as well is for the valuation of it. So on the bottom part of page 8, BioVision has changed, EM Adventures have changed, the Monica Dance Gym has changed. They've been slight increases, but $1 here or there makes a difference. And I'll share that later on with regards to the questions with Mr. Slaughter. And once again, Mr. Slaughter, I think, and this one here, I think our rents are quite comparable. Mr. Slaughter's not asking for anything outrageous.
No, this one there's a little bit.
Is there? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. And
So he is asking for something outrageous.
No,
Just clarify.
when the overall increase is 6%, I don't think Mr. Slaughter's being outrageous at all from our value figures. So what's interesting here right now when we look at this in our modeling process, right? You're always going to have good years and bad years, and I don't always do this because sometimes there's inconsistency in the information, right? And because our valuation is so close and it can be so subjective, if you look on page 10 of our brief, which shows the breakdown of the income expense mailer, we're showing all the different leasable areas over the 30,444 square feet. Our blended rate is $11.31. Using a 2.5% vacancy, the 2% expenses, coming up with a net operating income $326,417, 6.3% cap rate, we come up with a value of $5,181,000. And a lot of times, if we're doing a cap rate analysis, we'll do a 3-year average of the previous income to develop a cap rate for what the property would be if it potentially sold. So we have 326 as our model generated income, and our range in 18, 17, and 16 is, and when I'm saying 2018, that's February 28th, 2018. So it's before the reference. You have 345, 267, 328. There's always going to be valuation that changes, but that just shows you what the net income history is for this of the property. On page 11, what we have is some subject property leases here. Our model rents $11.31. We're in between $10.25 and $13, showing some of the different leases that take place. And my comparables are consistent to the comparables that we've used before. They range from $10 to $16.25. And that concludes my formal presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see.
Questions, Mr. Slaughter?
No questions.
No questions, Mr. Bickler?
No, thank you.
Ms. Stevens? No. And I don't either. So we can proceed. Mr. Slaughter, with your information?
So the property is shown on page 2. Again, Spurfield Flex Warehouse kind of stretches along from Spurfield on the north side. Built in 2001, the wall height is 21 feet. The improvement is 26,420 square feet building size, and you can see in the picture there's some windows. There is some mezzanine space in some units, totaling 3,906 square feet. And the building ratio is 3.13 to 1. So we go to page 7. We've analyzed the actual income in place. And again, we feel that unless there's any reasons to vary, we think this is often the best indicator of market rent. And the total that you see on page 7, it is a little lower than what the city is using. The city applies an average of $12.60, and according to our analysis, the actual rents come in at $11.32.
$11.60.
$11.60.
You said $12.60 by accident, I think.
Oh, sorry.
I thought you said that your average was 11.31. That's what I wrote down.
Our average,
I might have written down the wrong thing.
our average is $11.31.
No, but you said 11:31.
Yeah.
That's the wrong time.
Yeah, that's our average, yeah.
So,
So I guess we're equal then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
no, you're outrageous. It's a penny more.
Okay, Ron.
Okay.
The model works sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. No, if it's fair, it's fair. So
Yeah.
that's. No. We do again have a contention with the vacancies. This is an interesting one. So the vacancy at the time of the reference date is 0. Right before that, the vacancy in the property was 10.4%. The year before it was 10.4%. So it's this kind of thing where you may look at 1 year and say everything's great, but you should stabilize, look at what's happening, and also, in our opinion, you should think about what may happen. So this is a case where I think it's a bit of an anomaly to be at 0, and I think it's optimistic to be at 2.5. We're not asking for the stabilized vacancy, which is just under 7%. We're asking, again, for the market allowance of 4%. This property does have higher expenses, recoverable expenses. They're at $6.30 a foot that you'd see on the rent rolls when you total up the recoverable expenses. So we have increased the shortfall allowance to $6 a square foot. And lastly, non-recovered expenses. Again, as we see time and time again, especially with these type of properties, it costs money to get money. We can't look at one half of the equation for assessment purposes. We have to look at the whole. There are non-recovered expenses that we'll see on each of the statements over the years: leasing commissions, professional fees, asset management fees. None of these are recovered. None of these are being recognized by the city's analysis. We ask that the 5% be reinstated again for this property. So in the end, we have I apologize, I'm all over the place here. According to this, we accept both the rent and the vacancy, because I have 2.5% of my valuation. But we have the higher shortfall, the management expenses. We accept the city's capitalization rate of 6.3% again. And again, this is a very optimistic rate. We're recognizing things that we typically would recognize in a cap rate in other areas of the income. So we feel that this is a supportable value on page 8 at $4,887,000. In appendix, we just have the supporting documentation, the income statements and rolls provided by the owner. You'll see on page 23, they actually note when they have to spend money on some of these units. The tenant inducements are noted. And in this particular year, they are $140,000 approximately. So the real expenses, we can't ignore them. That completes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bullock, any questions?
Yeah. According to municipal board orders, do we include tenant inducements in the valuation process?
I was waiting for that topic to come up. I thought it would come up earlier. Mr. Chairman, we are of the firm opinion that certain municipal board orders are being taken out of context. The rationale is that the city claims that a statement in certain board orders, and I'll get into exactly what those board orders were talking about, but that the statements that they won't in those cases exclude leasing commissions and tenant improvements were based on the evidence before them. I'll talk about in a moment. The assumption that those statements create a jurisdictional exception, we feel, is implausible. What that means is the municipal board said to the assessment department, increase assessments by 5%. You have our permission. That's not acceptable. It's against the legislation. It's not market value. What those decisions said is, the very first one, actually what they say is, there's 5 or 6 of them you probably heard, and they all say, we've discussed this. Go back to the Richardson building. The Richardson building decision was in 1994. The appellant came forward with evidence that there should be a deduction of tenant inducements and leasing commissions from the rents. Now let's be clear about what they were asking. They were asking for, and as an example, I showed you $140,000 in tenant inducements on page 23. They were saying, take that off of the rents. Reduce the rents to a net effective. Capitalize that. In addition, the 5% allowance was being applied at the same time. So and in this case, the only thing the board said is that the appellant dropped their position. So something happened behind the scenes, they dropped the position. No decision was made. Same circumstances with the next decision they refer. It's called the National Trust Decision 1997. The property is 444 St. Mary, a multi-tenant Class B office. The owner's agent was asking for a deduction from the face rents for all of the inducements required to get those rents. We agree that's inappropriate. What the allowance that was instated in these decisions is referring to is exactly those expenses, but amortized, spread out over the life of the property, right? So, which is more plausible? That the board in that decision, when they said we're not deducting the TIs and the tenant leasing commissions, is it more plausible that what they're saying is we allow the 5%. The 5% is stated in the assessment manual at the time to include these kind of non-recovers. The appraisal theory refers to these as leasing commissions. You've already got the allowance. It's inappropriate for us to make a larger deduction from the face rents to a net effective and then capitalize that. Is it plausible that that's what they're saying? Or do you think what they're saying is, just ignore them, who cares what the market does? Take it out, increase the assessment by 5% in perpetuity, you got our permission. Thank you.
That's the answer to that question. Do you have any other questions?
Sure. I gave him the form, so... That's perfectly fine. I really don't mind. So I'll ask for 2 things. So on page 7, on your brief here, and I've asked this question before, and I just want to double check on that because, and I've shared this information. So if we're looking at your comparables here, and if we're looking at the leasing information that I have here from the mailer, On number 3, so page 8 are mine,
Okay,
page 7 are Rob's. And because it's within the reference period, this is, it doesn't show here, but it shows on top, is that this income statement was before the April 1st, 2018 reference period. So the first one I have here is BioVision Seed Research. We have a rent of $14 here, and you're reporting $12. Does that seem fair?
one moment, Mr. Phillip, let me just check something. I'll point out one thing while I'm looking for the second document.
Okay.
The date of your rent roll on page 8,
Yes.
what is the date?
The date on top portion of it, because I got it from the...
No, on the rent roll, on the actual rent roll, you'll see as of.
Oh, as of, it says December 31st, 2018.
Right.
And so, but they included it with the year end of, so it all came as one package. And I thought I had it, I made 5 copies of it, and I don't know where it is because I haven't seen it. Is that this morning, is that, oh, this is it here. This is the, I forgot to staple this. This is the rent roll that I got this from here. So I got the entire rent roll, which is dated June 3rd, 2019. The top portion says February 28th, 2018. And then if we look at the next pages here, because it's all at the same time, these are all, it says there December 31st, 2018, but it came from the 2018 mailer, which is before the April 1st, 2018 reference date. So that's why I'm using them.
So I'll explain our process.
Okay.
We have in our evidence, as we always do, the income and expense mailers that were submitted at the time of the reference date. And we typically, when it's an odd year end, it gets a little more difficult.
Yeah.
But typically, the last applicable year would be end of 17. And that's usually what we use as our starting point. But we always then check if we can find any information by April 18 to make sure that nothing's changed by that date. But we don't go past that date for the reasons that we discussed earlier. My process typically is that, for example, if a step-up occurs by April 18, or even a few months after, that the purchaser would know about in April 18, but it isn't shown on the 17 statement, we'll increase the rent to that rate.
Okay.
Now, what I see happening here is the rents that we applied in our analysis are from the rent roll submitted in 2017. Not sure of the exact date of this, if it is February or if it's December, but something happened with a step-up to these rents between those two dates. I don't know if it was as of April 18. If I knew that, I would have used the higher rent.
No problem. I just wanted to make sure that the board was noticed that, because I believe our model rents, and I've shared this before, that they are lower than actually what's taking place, but when you go through our calculations, and here is clearly a situation where I believe our rent rolls are probably under-assessed, like under market conditions. And this is a good example of that.
You asked the question now, okay?
Yep, no problem. So my question is that you explained my answer with regards to the discrepancy.
Right.
So that's fine. What was the actual? I know it's you've used 4%. Do you know what the vacancy was in 2018 by any chance?
It was 0.
Okay. And in 2019 it's not 0 anymore because they're, as I have here, and this shows the pictures of it. They're actually 3,000 square feet for these little spaces.
And I don't want to talk about that, but I guess the point is that an investor would say, it's at 0 now, do I think it's going to stay 0? What happened the years before? Well, it was 10 and 10.
Yeah.
There might be a problem here.
Yeah, for sure.
Not a problem, there might be.
No other questions?
Okay. Mr. Britt, any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Students, any questions? I don't either.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have the first item on the agenda that we're here last.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. Fuller and I, I repeat his statement, he's been very good to deal with through these documents. And we inspected this last property, and we had a position that we felt fairly strong about, and the client certainly had a position they felt strong about. I've taken all information into account with Mr. Fuller, and I recommended to the client that maybe this assessment is fair. They don't agree. So I've given them more information to consider that, and I was awaiting the approval to withdraw. I don't have that.
Right.
With your permission, if it's okay with you, I have two choices. One is I present as I would, the evidence that we submitted, or I can simply ask for a confirmation of the assessment.
Well, that's your choice.
Okay. I feel like I'm not doing my job to not submit the evidence, but if my recommendation to them is to just let this go, my assumption is that sometime after today, when they've taken in all the information, if they agree with me, the assessment stays as it is. If they don't, then we can take it to the Manitoba Municipal Court.
Which you can do anyway if you make your argument and we don't accept it. And,
No, exactly.
Really. I suppose you're in the position that I felt myself in a lot of times when I was a lawyer, and you sometimes had positions that a client took, they had to present that you might not be entirely comfortable with. Having expressed that to us, so that's in a position where we're probably going to go with the recommendation, because if you feel it's reasonable, and so does the assessor, I don't know,
Yeah, I kind of showed my hand
Yeah,
before I
basically. Yeah.
And in fairness, to show the due diligence, we could still just go through the process, and whatever you decide, you can decide.
Well, it's fine to do that anyway,
Yeah,
because
okay.
we have to still, we don't necessarily have to agree with even
whatever,
the- Yeah. So I think we should proceed, we can do so fairly quickly.
Yeah, then I'll preface what I was saying by stating that we originally had a concern with the assessment. The client has a concern. There are things here that I do think would be worth talking about, so I think that's a good idea. Let's go through it.
Okay.
Okay. Property we have in question is file number 193186. Roll number is 030716-15000. For 2020, we have assessed value of $14,309,000. It's a warehouse, a combination of an office component and a warehouse component. You'll be seeing pictures later on. Rod and I did an extensive tour, about an hour of this property. The actual year of builds for these properties is between 1966 and 2014, and the overall effective age for this property, which is derived the cap rate, was 1980, which is important. We have a land area of 360,799 square footage. And we have a leasable area of 228,633. We have a land to building ratio of 2.05. A lot of times at these hearings, when it comes to warehouse space and distribution, we're saying we need to have 4:1, it's under the rules, we need to do an adjustment for that. Well, what had happened here is because they had expanded it significantly before the expansion, their ratio was, I do believe, around just over 3:1, and I can't find it here right now. So what had happened here is so obviously land to building ratio was not important for them, because they did an extension. They made the warehousing space bigger, so that's important to realize. Page 2 shows the subject property pictures. Those are the first two I just got off the website, and just, here's that argument that I had here. I showed the current picture, and then the old picture. So on page 3, we're showing where the current pictures of the building here. And then on page 4, top of page 4, you can see the land to building ratio, where there was quite a bit of that land there. But they made the decision here, and I had similar properties with the Sobeys warehousing on Inkster. When an organization makes a business decision to expand, land to building ratio is not significant. Obviously it needs to be able to move a truck, but if it's within the parameters, what's reasonable, and I don't think land to building ratio is an issue here. Bottom of page 4 shows the front lobby area. Page 5 just shows some pictures. What's funny about this, as I'm doing the tour, we have an effective age of 1980. So you got some aspects that are distinctively older, but you have some aspects that are distinctively newer. Page 6 shows a main floor small boardroom, main office area on page 6. Page 7 shows some hallway space and elevators. Page 8 shows the basement area. And when you go through our evaluation, you're going to notice that there is a different, I do believe there is a different, let me double check. Yeah, we do have a different rate for the basement area. So you can see by the basement area here, some of it's very old and basic with regards to the finishing and whatnot, but it's usable space. They use the space, it's a workshop area. So I believe that the rent that we're using is not unreasonable. And if we look at the garage area for this, right? It's a vehicle service garage, brand new vehicle service garage. Rents are, in the mid-teen range. Obviously a lot smaller square footages, but You're seeing it very clean, nice space. Page 9 shows some more basement storage area. Page 10 shows, the top of page 10 shows a basement training room. And there are other aspects that I didn't take pictures of because they were meeting rooms, but they actually have a bunch of smaller offices and training areas and boardrooms that we did not have access to. Bottom of page 10 shows the second floor office area. Page 11 shows just outside the mini boardroom. Obviously, this area has been refinished and designed. It's quite pleasant. Top of page 12 shows the old cafeteria area, which is being decommissioned, and the subsequent lunch area behind that, and coffee area on the other side. And so the reason why this old cafeteria is being decommissioned, if you look at Boardroom on page 13, MLCC is expanding their operations. They are moving to, on King Edward, the old Safeway Lucerne factory for their storage space. So this aspect of the building, they're still going to keep the office portion at Buffalo Place, but they're moving out their warehousing out to Route 90, which is a bit better location in terms of moving trucks and product and whatnot. And so, bottom page 3 shows the advertisement for it. So industrial space in Southwest Winnipeg, some details of it. Property details shows what's the main floor warehouse space, the mezzanine, the ceiling heights and the discrepancy, and what they're listed at, 22 in subsections, 33 in others. Zoning, heating, cooling, possession date is of April 1st, 2020. Additional building information with regards to 36 floor with regards to changing stations, lighting, and just property highlights that we've talked about. We know this area quite well. Their ask is significantly higher than what we're asking. I've screened that out because I don't want to judge the board, but it is significantly higher.
Mr. Froelich, I object to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, is it wrong? Okay.
Well, if it's wrong
Okay.
to give us the numbers, wrong to
I didn't give you the number.
I'm saying if it's wrong to give us the numbers, wrong to indicate that you're asking
Okay.
for more.
Okay, no problem. Sorry. I apologize. Page 14 and 15 shows the site plans for the properties that are from the mailer, and the bottom of page 16 and bottom of page 16 shows the pictures that are in the advertisement. Top of 17 shows the pictures in the advertisement, and the bottom of page 17 just shows some pictures that I've taken. Page 18 shows the warehousing section that takes place. And unfortunately, Rod and I had an interesting conversation with the individual who was running the quality assurance area. He was telling us the process and everything like that. I didn't take a picture of that area, but there is, in this back portion, there is some office space as well.
Is there a testing room?
What's that?
Is there a testing room?
Yeah, there was.
Yeah, well, there is a testing area. Oh, there
They
is.
do have one in there.
Yeah, we didn't have any. Unfortunately, yeah.
I've been in it.
Yeah, we were.
It's not in the warehouse.
Yeah. So, anyways, yeah. So, no testing. Yeah. It was a great. One of the things I love about my job is having these opportunities to do that, and so I'm thankful for that experience to do it. So, what we have here, fully owner occupied. So obviously, when you talk about the management and their expense ratio stuff, we want to be equitable. So this is our process here. So, what we have for rents, page 22. So what we have here is, because we have two income streams, one of them is an OFS. So for the basement area, we have 17,710 square feet. We have $4.42. I believe that's very reasonable. For the next portion, which is the government agency, which is the office portion of it, for the first floor and second floor, we have 39,402. I believe that's very generous, the 918 for the quality of the space and the quality of the finish. So our blended rate is 764. For the office portion of it, we have a 5.5% vacancy rate. 2% expenses, $7 shortfall, to come up with a net operating income of $389,194, using a 6.7% cap rate. We have a value for the office portion of $5,809,000. And you guys may ask this, the blended cap rate for the entire property is 6.88. So why do I feel that our rents are being generous? I do not have any basement rents for this, but if you look at comparable number one, for NOFS on 1000 Waverly. We have $14.50 on, and the ones that I've highlighted here. And, you know, I got another one, comparable 3 at $14. And then, you know, if you look at comparables 15 and 16, we have 1075 and 1550. Buffalo Place, 1560 at number 17. Waverly is 1550, 1650. Chevrolet is 1350. So I don't know why this rent's so low, but I think we've been generous with regard to the rent for this based on comparables. And I'm not saying that there aren't lower rents, but I think we're being generous with that rent on this property. Page 24, the distribution warehouse portion of it. 170,521 square feet. We're using a rent of $3.75. Total is $639,454. 2.5% vacancy. Expenses at 2%. Shortfall $375. Comes up with a net operating income of $595,013. With a cap rate of 7%, comes up with a value of $8.5 million. My comparables first comparables on Redwood at 653. Please discount the comparable at 630 Kernahan. There's been new information on this, and Mr. Slaughter and I are getting information with regards to trying to clarify that. Got a warehouse space on Fife at 450. Distribution spaces at 517, $422.5. Once again, I think with regards to the distribution warehouse, similar square footages, I think our rent is very, very fair. And that concludes my final presentation.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Froelich, so we inspected the property, we saw the basement, you described it, but just to reiterate that, to confirm, there is no office in the basement, correct?
Well, there's a maintenance office.
Yeah.
And there's some boardrooms there. We did see some training center. Like on page 10, there's a training center that we saw in the basement.
Yeah, but the majority of the basement is storage, mechanical, very Spartan finish at best.
Yeah, and we didn't see the other boardrooms because what was distinctive about the property is they had smaller boardrooms that were different aspects of Manitoba. Like there was the Gimli room, and there was like the porch repair room, and we didn't see those ones because they were potentially locked. Or was it Arthur? No, Nelson. He gave us a tour.
Yeah, I can't remember that.
Anyways, he didn't have access to it because he's in charge of all their buildings, and I was with him when I did an inspection of another property earlier this week. So, you know, overall, I'm comfortable with the rent that we have here. There's a mixture, but storage space is still valuable space because if you don't have it, you're still going to need it. You know, the garage space that we had here that was in the lower level, you know, if that's a vehicle service garage, it's significantly higher than $5 for this type of building. Older garage space buildings that are in the inner city are $5. You know,
do we have any examples of storage space or office space in basement locations?
The rents that we've used for this is something that's been I believe it's been sort of mutually agreed upon. And we're asking for $375, which is actually, or $442, which is less than the $5 that we use as a standard. So,
is mechanical space typically valued or leased, paid for in the market?
Well, this is a single owner occupancy building, so we do the entire square foot area for it.
So you're applying that rate to the mechanical areas, which was significant in the basement. You're applying that as well.
But not necessarily, because if we look at the space that we're using is only 18,710 square feet for basement space, and so when we have the plan area, and it's hard because you may have it other than I do, but I'm not.
That's the gross basement area, though.
Yeah, that's a gross basement area.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So, what we have here is described as a distribution warehouse, office at the front.
Okay, you assume we don't want to ask questions, and you probably read that assumption, so you
I'm leading up to a question.
Oh, you're asking questions?
Yeah.
Oh,
what we have is a distribution warehouse, office in the front. Would the assessment department typically value that as separate components? I mean, we've seen many examples in evidence today where we have distribution warehouses with an office component, but it's valued as one, correct?
Yeah. This building's very distinctive. in regards to what the warehousing portion is and what the office portion. If it's for lease with just the warehouse portion, there's obviously a situation where you could have two separate buildings here, two separate functions. You could have an office function, and MLCC is not concerned about leasing out the warehousing space. So, you know, it's common for us to have two income streams for a single property.
What you're describing, though, is MLCC's own plans for the property, post-reference date, mind you, as well. But would that hypothesis not apply to any distribution warehouse with office?
It could apply, and that's something that when I look at industrial rates with regards to this, what is the magic number? In this situation here, there's a pure situation where it can be separated and it will be separated. Some other buildings may not have that access. And you know, when we went outside or when we did the tour of this, there's clearly a separation between the warehousing aspect of it and the office portion of it.
Well, I think no more than I've seen typically in office warehouse properties.
Yeah, but I think with technology, I think the capabilities are there to be separated.
The total build out here is approximately 17%, correct? Like the office portion of this.
Oh yeah, it's nuts. Yeah.
Yeah. In the market, does the market typically value a property like this in two different income streams, or do they, when they rent a space, do they assume that they have the office, and when they buy the property, it's typically?
Well, to look at it, we're not dealing with a huge difference. Like the warehouse portion of it, which is the driver of the building, is 7%. The office portion is 6.88%. Like the overall blended rate.
You're talking about the capitalization?
The capitalization rate. So we're looking at the office rate of 6.7%, right? And we're using the warehousing portion, which is 7%. So you can go plus or minus 0.25 on a cap rate very easily. Our overall blended rate is 6.88. I think it's fair with regards to the quality of the building that we're looking for and the location that we're looking for.
You mentioned size is an important factor in the capitalization rate.
Yeah, size is, because you'll see the differences in our model sizes, yeah.
Right. So the 7% on the warehouse is probably reflective, partially, I mean, there's many factors, but that probably is influenced by the size of this.
Unequivocally.
Yeah. That's all the questions.
Thank you. And I think my assumption was that we don't have any questions. I think that's correct.
You're very right.
So you can go ahead.
Okay, and I think I found a solution to my conundrum.
Oh, good.
And that is, I'll be frank, we originally felt that this assessment was a little excessive. The owner, of course, was looking at just the increase, and it's high, and that's why they were concerned. We inspected the property. We were accepting the city's rent on the warehouse. But in my objective opinion, when I saw that warehouse space, I thought, I don't know if it's actually $375. And based on the evidence I see, I'm actually thinking maybe closer to $4. Hence my concern, hence my recommendation to the owner. My solution is, if I actually apply $4 a square foot and increased amount on the rent for the warehouse, it comes out to exactly, with my other adjustments, the same value that the city has on the warehouse. Well, 8.498 million is my calculation, you're at 8.5 million. My solution, Mr. Chairman, if I may, is to change my value because I have increased my warehouse value to match what the city did overall, and I've addressed my concern.
Okay.
And I can get back to my original concern, which is on the office component.
Okay.
So the revised value, therefore, if I may, is $13,315,000. Okay, so our concern is
13,315,000.
It really comes down to this, Mr. Chairman, that I have difficulty when certain properties, for whatever reason, are treated differently, like this one is, than the market would typically treat them. So if we look at warehouses, if we look at the rents that are attained for them, if we look at sale prices, warehouses always have a build-out component to service them. And they will vary, and typically the higher the build-out, the greater the rent or the sale price, not always, all things considered equal. So when we take this one and we separate it out, I think we are, it gets a little dangerous, I think. And I think we can overstate the value that way when we look at two separate halves. Because they can be separated, but any property can be separated. The question is, when we look at the evidence in the market, are those all separated? Are those rents for just warehouse and just office? And the answer is no. So if we look at the valuation of the office component, and we're still going to look at it this way because that's the way the assessment is designed, and as I mentioned, we're going to accept the overall value on the warehouse. So if I can draw your attention, please, to page 10, we talked just about this office component. Whatever evidence we see for offices in the market, I think is misleading, because these are offices in multi-tenant flex warehouses or in multi-tenant offices in the area. They are offices, they only are offices. But what we're dealing with is the office which is used to service the warehouse which is already assessed. It's also much larger in size. We're talking about 58,000 square feet. For these reasons, I don't think it's appropriate to just use these smaller offices in the area and say that's great. We do, though, have a very interesting comparison at Fultz Boulevard. It's a new property, and it was converted into a call center, 92,000 square feet, and the rent paid after all the inducements and the work done by the owner is $9 a square foot. Anything else is higher is in flex warehouses where you have smaller areas or specifically just for office. So therefore, we think an appropriate rate on the office is $9 if we are going to value this separately than the warehouse. The unfinished basement, like Mr. Folk and I discussed this, in my mind, there's a lot of mechanical down there, a lot of very spartan finish. We typically apply a much lower rate to basement space if it's office, but this isn't even in our mind that. Unfortunately, I don't have it in evidence, but there are municipal board orders that suggest, even with the BOMA standard, that the fact is the market doesn't pay for mechanical areas. They're part and parcel of what they're paying for the leased space. So considering the amount of mechanical space in the basement and the finish of the space, I don't think a rent of half, which is basically what the city is applying now at 422, is appropriate. I think it should be something less than that. And I've used a third, which is $3 a square foot. So therefore, you see on page 10 that we have a revised rent component for the office portion. We accept everything else in the city's valuation of the office except two items. We still have the contention about the non-recovery expenses. It applies to properties like this. And in fact, this is a great example because as we hear from Mr. Krolik, the intent is, and it's the owner's intent, is to try and get a tenant for the rear space. And we're now into a multi-tenant situation. There's going to be these costs incurred. If I'm buying the property, regardless if I'm going to do that or not, that's part of the equation that I would apply to come to a market value. So I think it applies in this case as well. The last is the capitalization rate. We heard evidence about why 7% was applied on the warehouse, but there's a different rate applied on the office. I agree with the 7% on the warehouse. It reflects the size of this property, the low land-to-building ratio, other factors. I think it makes sense. I don't think it makes sense, for the reasons I stated earlier, to hive off a portion and say that that commands a lower cap rate. It's one property. It should be 7% cap rate for the entire property. With those revisions, and accepting the overall value of the warehouse because of my increased rent, we come to the $13,315,000.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bola, any questions?
Yeah, I just want to double check with you. So, because I see conflicting information and then you've made a new recommendation on that. So for the warehouse, okay, so for the, do you know what our shortfall rate is for the office portion of it?
I think you're using 550.
$7.
7.
So isn't that close? Isn't that being fair for the office portion of it for
the
the request? Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have actual expenses to compare it to, but looking at comparisons, that makes sense.
Okay. And what's the property on Fultz? What's the number? Because without addresses, we can't verify the information. So it's just.
Yeah.
I know we would ask for it when we have time, but it just makes our jobs a bit more difficult when we don't have access to that.
I want to say 19. It's the property that's, there's a Fountain Tire distribution warehouse at the end of Fultz on the south end, and it's across the street. It's owned by Quadrille. It's converted to a call center. I think it's 19 Fultz.
Was it used to be the old Convergys or the old
That's
call
it.
center?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
That's the one.
So what is 19
I
Fultz?
think it's 19.
Okay. You don't have any pictures of that space or anything like that to show that as being comparable in terms of office, you know. And so the basement space that you have the $3 with, is it like the training rooms And the garage space that's used for that, which is like a service garage, should that be significantly higher than $3? Because a comparable, like even if it's in a basement, the service garage is a service garage. When we looked at the comparables here, it still seemed to be, like the pictures of it, it still seemed to be a decent height. So isn't that being super aggressive by asking for, you know, $3 rent on space, which for other service garage space within the city of Winnipeg is much higher than $3?
Yeah, I don't think I've seen any comparisons of loading facilities in the basement like that. So in my mind, that is unfinished space in the basement, being used as a service garage. Another more important factor is the amount of mechanical space in the basement, which I don't think commands anything. So I think $3 is being fair.
So you're saying this has no utility or no value for a potential owner?
No, I said it's $3 a square foot is overall. Like, you know, if we blended it, that would be maybe 5 and the mechanical room 0. But it's
No further questions.
Any questions, Mr. Whitman?
No questions. Thank you.
Stevens? I don't either.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, that was longer than I anticipated.